fine. Isn't that simply more police officers? But what about funding for youth services?
Get an in-depth look at what the main parties are promising when it comes to crime. From more police funding to the environment, the Times and the Sunday Times will guide you through. Pick up your copy today or visit thetimes.co.uk.
I love Black Friday. Busy shops, crazy people, average deals. It's so much fun.
Said no one ever. So be savvy and do Black Friday the easy way with Smarty. Grab a huge 100 gig data SIM for just £17 a month on the mega plan. And with no credit checks, speed restrictions or contracts tying you down, you can kick back with the best Black Friday deal around. Now that's Smarty. Search Smarty Mobile to find out more, but hurry, as this deal won't be around for long. See smarty.co.uk for terms.
We take you to the NATO conference, where the president's beginning his bilateral with Macron.
Report on it. We talked about it, and please give my condolences to the families and to France. They're great fighters. You've done a fantastic job in that whole area. It's a tough area, so we appreciate it very much. We'll be talking about a lot of things, including NATO and including trade. We do a lot of trade with France, and we have a minor dispute. I think we'll probably be able to work it out. But we have a big trade relationship, and I'm sure that within a short period of time, things will be looking very rosy, we hope. That's usually the case with the two of us. We get it worked out. We've had a lot of good things. We've done a lot of good things together as partners. Our countries have been partners in many good ventures, including some having to do with radical Islam and others, and it's always worked out. So I look forward to our discussion. We made a lot of progress in our first 25 minutes, and we intend to make a lot of progress in our next hour, maybe hour and a half. So thank you very much, my friend.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Je suis heureux une fois encore de retrouver le Président Trump ici à Londres. Comme il a dit, d'abord, je tiens à le remercier pour ses condoléances et les mots qu'il a eus pour nos soldats. Nous avons rendu hier un hommage national à Paris. Nos 13 soldats sont tombés sur le théâtre d'opération Mali. Et merci pour cette solidarité et aussi l'implication de vos soldats sur le terrain dans cette lutte contre le terrorisme. Le Président l'a dit, nous avons commencé nos discussions, nous allons les poursuivre. D'abord sur le plan bilatéral, avec des sujets économiques, commerciaux, dont nous allons à coup sûr une fois encore trouver l'issue. Nous avions commencé à en parler à Biarritz, là aussi, pour ce qui s'agit d'axes sur le numérique, des sujets commerciaux et l'ambition que nous avons aussi pour nos économies. Il y a également les sujets qui concernent l'OTAN. Là aussi, nous avons également commencé à parler de plusieurs crises internationales pour nous coordonner. Et il est clair que nous aurons, lors de ce sommet, des discussions importantes, qu'elles concernent d'ailleurs l'implication des différents membres de l'OTAN en tant qu'organisation au sein de la coalition internationale en Syrie, comme les travaux que nous menons ensemble sur les différents sujets. J'ai eu l'occasion de le dire à plusieurs reprises, la coopération entre nos deux pays, qu'elle soit militaire, économique, diplomatique, est importante. Il nous arrive parfois de ne pas être d'accord, on l'a eu sur le climat, mais sur la lutte contre le terrorisme, sur les engagements essentiels, nos soldats, nos équipes travaillent côte à côte. Et nous décidons, je crois pouvoir le dire, en partageant cette finalité. Et nous avons toujours su trouver une solution aux problèmes qui nous étaient posés. Donc je suis très heureux de pouvoir avoir cet échange, de poursuivre dans un instant, et surtout de pouvoir faire avancer les choses ensuite lors de ce sommet, qui doit répondre à des questions fondamentales pour l'organisation, questions qui n'ont pas été traitées jusqu'alors. Comment bâtir une paix plus durable en Europe, avec beaucoup de menaces aux frontières, parfois des incohérences. Comment aussi agir plus efficacement face à nos ennemis communs, en particulier le terrorisme islamique. Et là aussi, il faut que tout le monde autour de la table soit parfaitement clair sur des définitions, des finalités, et c'est que nous partageons cela ensemble. Voilà.
Okay, thank you very much.
President Trump, you have a better understanding of what President Macron was saying about NATO?
Well, we just began discussing NATO, and what I'm liking about NATO is that a lot of countries have stepped up, I think really at my behest, and also yourself, you're close to the level. But they've stepped up and they put up a lot of money. I told you it was $130 million, $130 billion, and that's a lot. And they're now stepping up again. It's going to be $400 billion over a very short. We have commitments for $400 billion. And we just left the Secretary General, and he's got some things that are very important. And I discussed with him the flexibility so that we have it not just with one area of the world. You and I discuss this all the time. We have all areas of the world because NATO's a lot different than it was, and now it's certainly a lot different over the last 3 years. So we have a lot of countries stepping up and putting up a lot of money. The number as of this moment is exactly $131 billion. That's a year, and that's a tremendous amount of money, but it's not enough. And they also raise and have commitments for $400 billion. So NATO, which was really heading in the wrong direction 3 years ago, is heading down. If you look at a graph, it was to a point where I don't think they could have gone on much longer. Now it's actually very strong and getting stronger. Many people are committed to that 2%, and ultimately I think the 2% will be raised. And the President and I think, feel that we need more flexibility, and I think we both agree on that, so that we can use it for other things, not just looking at one specific country. And a lot of people say it was meant to look at originally the Soviet Union, now Russia, but we also have other things to look at, whether it's radical Islamic terrorism, whether it's the tremendous growth of China. There are a lot of other things. So NATO is becoming different than it was, much bigger than it was, and much stronger than it was because people are now fulfilling their commitments. There are some countries that aren't fulfilling their commitment, and those countries are going to be dealt with. Maybe I'll deal with them from a trade standpoint. Maybe I'll deal with them in a different way. I'll work something out where they have to pay. But, we don't want to have people delinquent. I don't think it's fair for us to be involved, including France, by the way, to be involved, and you have countries that aren't paying their way. They're less than 1%. You have a couple that are less than 1%. Not fair. So NATO's made a lot of progress over the last 3 years, and the word flexibility is very important. They're not just looking at one area now, they're looking at the world, and that's very important. To me, it's very important. Please.
No, I know that my statements created some reactions and shake a little bit. A lot of people, I do stand by. And I have to say, when you look at what NATO is and should be, first of all, this is a burden we share. And President Trump just reminded you some figures, and the fact that it is perfectly true that the US overinvested decades after decades, and is number one by far. And I do share the statement. That's why I'm a strong supporter of a stronger European component in NATO, which is exactly what we are doing. So in terms of cost sharing, we are investing 1.9% of our GDP. We are increasing our GDP. We will be at the rendezvous. But when we speak about NATO, it's not just about money. We have to be respectful with our soldiers. The first burden we share, the first cost we pay, is our soldiers' lives. And I do believe that in such circumstances, we do pay what we have to pay for collective security. When I look at the situation in Syria, in Iraq, but as well in Sahel, France is definitely present. But my third point is that we have today strategic clarifications to be done. It's impossible just to say we have to put money, we have to put soldiers, without to be clear on the fundamentals of what NATO should be. And this is not the case today. What about peace in Europe? I want us to have clarification about that. After the decision of the end of the INF Treaty, we have to build something new, because now this is a risk for Germany, France, and a lot of European countries to have new missiles coming from Russia exploding out. We need such a clarification. And I want the European component to be part of the future negotiations of such a new INF treaty. When we speak about the enemy, I would say, of the alliance, what is the objective? To protect our partners against external threats and France will do it, and we will have full solidarity vis-à-vis eastern and northern states in Europe. But the common enemy today are the terrorist groups, as we mentioned. And I'm sorry to say that we don't have the same definition of terrorism around the table. When I look at Turkey, they now are fighting against those who fight with us, who fought. Clear definition of these groups and no ambiguity. I think we do.
Well, one thing I will also, I'd like to say that you've been really doing a great job in Africa, and you've been very much involved there, more than most, and that's been fantastic. I appreciate you saying the United States for decades have been paying really way disproportionately too much for NATO, and you'd have other countries paying far too little that are very directly benefited by it. And by the United States involvement. And we're changing that around somewhat, and it's very important. But we're a very important player. I think without us, NATO certainly is not the same thing as we discussed, and discuss it at length. This morning we discussed it with Secretary General Stoltenberg. But we're behind you 100%, and all of the money that's been raised, and all of these countries that are all of a sudden putting up money, it's a great thing to see. But we do have a great, we really have a different objective, I think, right now. We're looking at a much bigger picture, and that includes, well, it includes, you mentioned Iraq, but it really includes Iran, too. I think that if you look at what's going on in Iran, they have massive riots, they're having protests all over the country, and they're killing a lot of people. Everybody knows that. That's why they turned off their internet system, so nobody can find out. But if the media would go there, and it's, I think, very hard for the media to go there, frankly, right now, but they're killing a lot of people. But NATO has come a long way in 3 years, and it's something that we're very proud of, because we're with them. And NATO serves a fantastic function if everybody's involved. If they're not involved, and I really believe that the president is very much involved and likes the idea of NATO, but he wants it also to be utilized properly. If it's not utilized properly, we all agree, right? That's no good. So we've had a very good discussion. A lot of people, and we're meeting with a lot of countries later, as you know, and they're really stepping up. For the most part, they're all stepping up. We have one or two that aren't, and we'll have to deal with them in a different way. Maybe we, as I said, we'll deal with them on trade. We have a lot of power with respect to trade. They make a fortune with the United States, and then they don't pay their bills. That's no good. But NATO's come a long way in 3 years, and it's become very powerful. I think very powerful. And it's become, I think, a much fairer statement in terms of the United States, because we're able to go down a little bit. We were paying 4 to 4.3% of the largest GDP ever. Nobody's ever had a GDP like we have right now. And nobody's come close. And other people were paying 1%. Some people were paying less than 1% of a very small GDP. It's not fair. And if they get attacked, we protect them. But it's not fair. So a lot of changes have been made. Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. President, what is your message to President Macron about America's tech companies? And what will your process be in determining what additional products from France you might apply tariffs to?
Right. Well, we're working on that right now. We have discussed it. I think we'll be able to work something out, I hope. And maybe not. Maybe we'll do it through taxing. You know, we can work it out easily through taxing. But the tech, you know, they're American companies, the tech companies that you're talking about, they're not my favorite people because they're not exactly for me, but that's okay. I don't care. They're American companies. And we want to tax American companies, Phil. That's important. We want to tax them. That's not for somebody else to tax them. And as the president knows, we taxed wine and we have other taxes scheduled. But we'd rather not do that. But that's the way it would work. So it's either going to work out or we'll work out some mutually beneficial tax. And the tax will be substantial. And I'm not sure it's going to come to that, but it might. That's all.
Mr. President, has France committed to step up when investigating back foreign fighters in Syria?
Well, I haven't asked that to the president today. I have over the period of time. We have a tremendous amount of captured fighters, ISIS fighters, over in Syria. And they're all under lock and key. But many are from France, many are from Germany, many are from UK. They're mostly from Europe. And some of the countries are agreeing. I have not spoken to the president about that. Would you like some nice ISIS fighters?
Look,
I can give them.
if you look at the situation,
You can take everyone you want.
let's be serious. The very large number of fighters you have on the ground are ISIS fighters coming from Syria, from Iraq, and the region. It is true that you have foreign fighters coming from Europe, but this is a tiny minority of the overall problem we have in the region. And I think number one priority, because it's not yet finished, is to get rid of ISIS and these terrorist groups. This is our number one priority. And it's not yet done. I'm sorry to say that. You still have fighters in this region, in Syria and now in Iraq, and more and more. And the whole destabilization of the region makes the situation more difficult to fix the situation against ISIS. Second, some of these foreign fighters are being judged in Iraq because of the deeds precisely they acted in this very region. And we will have a case-by-case approach. We have a humanitarian approach for children, already organized, and we will have a case-by-case approach. But for me, the very first objective in the region is to finish war against ISIS. And don't make any mistake. Your number one problem are not the foreign fighters. This is the ISIS fighters in the region. And you have more and more of these fighters due to the situation today.
This is why he's a great politician, because that was one of the greatest non-answers I've ever heard. And that's okay.
Because sometimes you can have some temptation from the US side, I don't say about President Trump, but could be the press, to say this is the European responsibility. I'm sorry to say that. We have some of our people. But if you don't look at the reality of the situation, that is number one, not to be ambiguous with these groups. This is why we started to discuss about our relations with Turkey. But I think any ambiguity with Turkey vis-à-vis these groups is detrimental to everybody for the situation on the ground.
France has actually taken back some fighters. But we have a lot of fighters. We captured a lot of people. And we have captured 100% of the caliphate, but you know that means that it's still, they keep going and going. We sent a small contingent in and we wiped out another portion of ISIS. We don't want to happen, to me, what happened with President Obama, where it reformed and then it became stronger than it was in the first place. So we don't want that to happen. And as I said before, we've taken the oil. We have the oil. So we have total control of the oil so that they're not going to be able to use that. They use that oil to really to fuel up their wealth, to fuel up their money. That was their primary source of income. And they get contributions. So we have now lists of where these contributions come from, which is very important. You have people contributing, if you can believe it. Some of these people are wealthy people that make contributions. And we have lists of where we learned a lot. You know, when we got al-Baghdadi, that was a great get. And when we killed him, we have a lot of information that I'm revealing now for the first time, but we also got a lot of good information. So a lot of things are happening, and France has been very helpful. I have to say that. They've been very, very helpful. Okay? Go ahead. Any other questions, please?
Le président américain a eu des propos assez durs à votre rencontre ce matin. Comment abordez-vous ce sommet de l'OTAN et cette réunion?
Comme vous le voyez, avec beaucoup de pragmatisme et avec la volonté de faire avancer les sujets, comme toujours. Je défends les intérêts de la France, c'est aussi une position européenne, et je le fais avec le souci également d'avoir une relation amicale et constructive avec les États-Unis d'Amérique, et c'est ce que nous avons toujours privilégié avec le président. On a une discussion sur l'OTAN, je viens de réexpliquer quelle était notre position, et elle est assumée. Elle est assumée parce que nous sommes engagés militairement dans des tâches d'opération qui supposent la clarté. Ça a été évoqué. Il y a des sujets, ça a été évoqué par votre collègue américain, qui ont été révélés hier, celui de la taxe numérique. Sur ce sujet, je peux vous apporter une réponse extrêmement claire. Le premier, pourquoi on en est à cette situation? Parce qu'aujourd'hui, nous avons des entreprises numériques, quelle qu'en soit la nationalité, qui concurrencent des entreprises de l'économie réelle et qui ont 14 points de fiscalité en moins. Ça, la réalité. Donc il y a un biais, pas juste. Nous avons, sur la base de la proposition de la Commission européenne, passé une taxe numérique. Elle ne vise pas du tout les acteurs américains. Les entreprises françaises, chinoises, de toutes les nationalités sont touchées. Elle permet de corriger pour une partie d'entre elles cet écart et de répondre à une nécessité. La France l'a fait avec d'autres pays. Et donc, on aura en parlé. Ma première interrogation, qu'est-ce qui va se passer pour le Royaume-Uni, qui a pris la même taxe, pour l'Italie, même taxe, l'Autriche, l'Espagne, qui l'ont fait sur la base de la proposition de la Commission. Parce que si on est sérieux, il faudra que tous ces pays soient traités à la même enseigne. Donc, nous sommes là dans une phase qui va rentrer, de discussion, qui va se poursuivre dans les prochaines semaines, et je pense qu'avec le président Trump, nous pouvons régler cette situation. Et ce qui avait été d'ailleurs discuté à Biarritz, et je regrette que cette solution soit abandonnée, parce qu'elle était bien meilleure et pour les États-Unis et pour l'Europe, c'est d'avoir une taxe au niveau de l'OCDE. C'est d'avoir une vraie taxe multilatérale qui permet de ne faire aucune distinction, aucun biais, mais de taxer ces activités numériques par rapport aux biais qu'elles créent dans chaque pays. On va voir ce que donnent les discussions dans les prochaines semaines, mais elles impliqueront de toute façon une réponse européenne, car en la matière, pas la France qui serait sanctionnée ou attaquée, c'est l'Europe. Et donc la Commission s'est exprimée ce matin pour apporter son soutien, et c'est la Commission européenne aussi qui aura à réagir si il devait y avoir une escalade. Mais moi j'ai plutôt confiance dans le fait que là aussi on saura trouver une solution ensemble. Donc voilà, il n'appartient pas de commenter tel ou tel propos, mais de vous dire que pour ma part, je suis déterminé à défendre les intérêts de notre pays, à défendre les intérêts européens, et à le faire dans le plus grand respect et l'amitié avec les États-Unis d'Amérique et le camp de la liberté.
And I largely agree with that answer. I just have to say, though, I came into a position where the European Union was making anywhere from $100 to $150 billion a year in deficits to the United States. They were making it, we were losing it, and so we had to do something that is fair, not severe, I think fair. We're losing tremendous amounts of money. As you know, the European Union is very strong on barriers. Barriers meaning certain of our products can't come in, including agricultural product. It just can't come in. We can't sell it, and yet the European Union sells openly to the United States, and generally untaxed or taxed at a low level. So these are problems that we're talking about. These are problems that we're working out, and the digital tax is the least of it. I inherited a situation where the European Union, which was formed partially for this reason, I guess for a lot of reasons it was formed, but partially to make better or take advantage of the United States. And they've done that very brilliantly. And frankly, it's not right. So I've exposed it. A lot of people didn't know it. And we're doing things about it. We have no choice because the United States can't continue to lose the kind of money that they've lost over the last, literally since the formation of the European Union. And I think we'll work something out. They want to talk, as you know. The new head wants to talk, who's supposed to be a very respected woman, very highly respected. And I look forward to meeting her. They want to meet. But we have a very unfair trade situation where the U.S. loses a lot of money for many, many years with the European Union. Billions and billions of dollars. I mean, to be specific, over $150 billion a year. So we don't want to be doing that. And we can make a deal. We can take a harsh approach. We can solve that problem instantaneously if we wanted to. But I don't want to do that. These are friends of ours. These are people that we've had very extraordinary relationships with, and I do personally, and I'm sure we can work something out.
You mentioned earlier the Iran protest.
Does the United States support these protesters in Iran? I don't want to comment on that, but the answer is no, but I don't want to comment on that.
Mr. President, on Turkey, President Macron just said he wanted the United States to do more in terms of standing up to President Erdogan and clarifying the terms of that relationship. Are you supportive of those efforts by other NATO allies, or are you standing in the way of them?
Well, I can only say we have a very good relationship with Turkey and with President Erdogan. I do. I can't speak for the President of France. I mean, we have a very good relationship. We pulled our soldiers out and we said, you can patrol your own border now. I don't care who you do it with. Well, we're not going to have soldiers patrolling the border that's been fought over for 2,000 years. But we took our soldiers out. We put some of those soldiers around the oil where we've captured the oil and taken the oil. And we have the oil. But we've brought some home, and we will be bringing some home, and we've sent some to other areas. Okay? But we have a very good relationship with Turkey.
Mr. President.
And just on Turkey, to be clear, we have a lot of cooperations with Turkey on security, trade, migration, and so on. There is a full-fledged agenda with the European Union and France. I do respect all leaders, whatever they can say, even bad things about myself. I do respect. I never insulted anybody. But now the question for this NATO summit, I think we need clarification from the Turkish side. This is not us to qualify them and what they are doing. But I do believe at least we have two clarifications to be asked. How is it possible to be a member of the alliance, to work with all of us, to buy our materials, to be integrated, and to buy the S-400 from Russia? Technically, it is not possible. Some clarifications to be provided by the Turkish president as far as he wants to be part. Second, I understand from Turkey that they want to block all the declarations of the summit if we do not agree about their definition of terrorist organization, qualifying YPG and the others as terrorist groups, which is not our definition. These 2 points have to be clarified if they want to be a serious member of the alliance. I think so.
Mr. President, this is really why we're having meetings. Those are our points. And we'll be discussing that with the President today. Yes.
Mr. President, will you issue sanctions on Turkey over their purchase of the S-400 missile system?
We're looking at it now, and we're talking about it now. As you know, Turkey wanted to buy our Patriot system, and the Obama administration wouldn't let them. And they only let them when they were ready to buy another system, which is not the same system. But Turkey, for a long period of time, wanted very much to buy the Patriot system, which is our system, which is what NATO uses, which is a great system, which is the best system. But they wouldn't sell it to Turkey. So, you know, there are two sides of the story. I have to say this. But we will be discussing that with Turkey in a little while. We'll be meeting with Turkey in a little while, and also tomorrow. So,
but to be clear about this point, and for you to have the full overview, they were discussing with the Europeans on SAMPT, and we accepted to sell the SAMPT to them. So this decision is not due, and 100% explained by the refusal a few years ago of the Americans not to sell the Patriots. It's their own decision, even having a European option totally compliant with NATO. So they decided not to be compliant with NATO themselves.
Sir, Mr. President, Prime Minister Johnson, I believe, is organizing some sort of discussion later today about the Syria conflict. Are you going to take part in that and meet with him? And if not, why?
Are you talking about Ambassador?
Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister.
Oh, I thought you meant Woody Johnson.
No.
I said, boy, he's really risen rapidly. Woody, where is Woody? Is he here? He's not here. This is his house. I can't believe he's not here. Yes, we'll be meeting with Prime Minister Johnson in a little while. I'll be seeing him later on. We're going over to number 10, which is a very exciting place to be, as you know. And we'll be discussing a lot of different things, yes.
And one other related question, the London Bridge attack from a few days ago, do you have any comment here your first day?
No, I don't have a comment on the London Bridge attack other than to say that I was very proud of those people that grabbed them and did such a good job between the fire extinguishers and whatever else. It was an amazing job they did, and he was very violent. You could see that. I mean, this was captured very much on tape. I think the way I think they were British citizens. The way they stepped up was incredible. That was really great. So, a terrible thing, terrible attack. A lot of people very badly hurt. I believe 3 or 4 killed. Is it 4 now today? So it's terrible. It's a terrible thing, and I know it's an act of terrorism. It's been declared an act of terrorism, radical Islamic terrorism, by the way, and it's very bad. Very bad, but I think the way they stepped up, to me, that was something very special. Okay?
Mr. Trump, a question on Russia. Mr. Macron says that Russia shouldn't be designated as an adversary of NATO. Do you agree with that? Do you think Russia is the enemy? And Mr. Macron, who is the enemy today?
I don't think he does feel that. I think we get along with Russia. I think we can get along with Russia. I think you feel we can get along with Russia. We've discussed that before. But certainly we have to be prepared, whether it's Russia or somebody else, we have to be prepared. But he and I have a pretty similar view on that. I think we feel that we can get along with Russia. And I think it's a good thing to get along with Russia. And I campaigned on it. I mean, I go into big stadiums, people like it. And I think the Russian people would like to see it too. A lot of good can come out of it. But the purpose of NATO is that, but the purpose of NATO can be much more, and that's where we're showing the flexibility over the last period of 2 years. Okay?
Pour être clair sur votre question, l'Alliance s'est organisée pour en effet faire face à la Russie historiquement. Je pense qu'aujourd'hui, il nous faut regarder la nouvelle situation historique et aussi notre géographie, j'ai souvent dit. Je n'ai aucune naïveté à l'égard de la Russie. Et nous sommes très conscients sur les attaques cyber qu'il y a pu avoir, sur les conflits gelés qu'il y a aux frontières de l'Europe, et y compris sur la crise ukrainienne que nous vivons. Est-ce que le statu quo est la meilleure des options? Je ne crois pas. Et donc, nous devons engager une procédure avec quelques préconditions et une méthode. Les préconditions, c'est, on le sait, de savoir avancer sur le conflit ukrainien. C'est ce que nous ferons d'ailleurs le 9 décembre prochain à Paris, avec un sommet en format Normandie, pour essayer d'acter des avancées entre l'Ukraine et la Russie. Ensuite, c'est de pouvoir définir un agenda où les Européens, et possible ensuite les membres de l'Alliance, définissent des procédures, des définitions de menaces communes avec la Russie, de coopération possible, en tout cas de désescalade. Ça prendra du temps. Mais je pense que si nous voulons, d'une part, la stabilité en Europe, d'autre part, réduire la conflictualité, il est important d'initier un dialogue stratégique avec la Russie. Il faut le faire sans aucune naïveté et il faut le faire en étant conscience aussi du poids de l'histoire et de la peur que certains pays européens ont à l'égard de la Russie. Et je le dis ici en ayant beaucoup de respect et d'empathie pour ces derniers. À l'égard de la Pologne, des États baltes, de certains États nordiques, la Roumanie et quelques autres, nous savons que ce qui est attendu de nous, c'est aussi de les protéger à l'égard de potentielles agressions. Et donc, dans ce cadre-là, nous devons apporter de la visibilité pleine et entière sur les protections que l'Alliance et en son sein l'Europe peut et doit leur apporter. Et la France y jouera tout son rôle. Enfin, si je pense qu'il y a un ennemi commun, c'est le terrorisme international et en particulier le terrorisme islamique. Soyons clairs, ce qui nous conduit à agir ensemble au Levant, dans le cadre d'une coalition internationale qui est aujourd'hui sous responsabilité américaine, mais où l'OTAN est engagée en tant qu'organisation, et comme vous le savez, la France qui est très présente, c'est aussi ce qui nous conduit à agir au Sahel contre ces conférences.
Monsieur le Président, on vous sent autant déterminé que isolé sur la scène européenne, parce que vous avez parlé de la peur de la Russie, il y a aussi la peur, il faut le dire, des États-Unis, de la part de certains de vos voisins, qui se disent on ne peut pas avoir à la fois une défense européenne forte et être dans l'OTAN. Je sais que c'est ce que vous essayez de dire, vos conseillers disent on peut avoir fromage et dessert, c'est l'expression qui est revenue. Comment vous arriverez à bouger les lignes, sachant qu'il y a des situations politiques un peu compliquées, y compris chez vos voisins les plus puissants en Allemagne?
D'abord parce que c'est pas fromage et dessert, ou alors c'est un cheesecake. Parce qu'en l'espèce, ce dont on parle, c'est d'avoir une Europe qui investit plus dans la défense, qui permettra de réduire l'investissement américain. Donc c'est parfaitement cohérent. Mais après, par exemple, c'est un rapport à la souveraineté et à la puissance. Il est légitime que les États-Unis d'Amérique nous disent aujourd'hui, pour protéger vos frontières européennes, pour aller régler vos conflits de voisinage, qui sont votre voisinage, vous devez être plus investi, vous devez payer davantage, vous devez investir davantage. C'est légitime. Et donc, nous ne sommes pas dans une situation de sortie de la Deuxième Guerre mondiale où, il faut bien le dire, l'Europe était désarmée et où une partie des Européens ne voulaient pas du réarmement de certains Européens. Je pense aux Allemands. Et nos mentalités ont été construites pendant des décennies, où l'OTAN était d'ailleurs fait pour que certains n'aient pas accès à une souveraineté militaire. Les temps ont changé. D'abord parce qu'il n'y a plus de pacte de Varsovie. J'ai cru comprendre que le mur de Berlin était tombé, ça fait quand même 30 ans. Et il y a aussi, depuis plusieurs années, les États-Unis d'Amérique qui nous disent prenez vos responsabilités. Je ne suis pas aussi pessimiste que vous. Ces 2 dernières années, on a fait avancer une coopération renforcée, un fonds européen de défense, une initiative européenne d'intervention dont tout le monde nous disait qu'elle était impossible. Maintenant, il y a chaque mois des nouveaux membres. Les 8 membres historiques étaient présents le 14 juillet à Paris. La Grèce nous rejoint, l'Italie nous rejoint, et ça continue. Et donc les choses avancent. Il y a une vraie dynamique. Et elle continuera d'être là, et elle se fera, je dirais, de manière totalement intégrée avec l'OTAN. C'est l'ambiguïté qu'il faut lever à l'égard de certains autres qui ont peur. Ça ne suppose pas de se livrer aux menaces extérieures, de se désarmer. Au contraire, ça veut dire une Europe qui prend ses responsabilités au sein de l'Alliance pour alléger la charge des États-Unis d'Amérique et pour porter sa part de souveraineté. D'avoir une discussion maintenant stratégique. On va commencer à l'avoir. J'en ai parlé avec le secrétaire général Stoltenberg, on en a parlé commencé à en parler avec le président Trump. Mais il est clair que nous devons assurer l'ensemble des pays de l'Europe, et je pense aussi à ceux qui sont à moins de 500 km de la frontière russe, mais ce n'est pas couvert par le traité FMI, de ne pas être exposés à des armements russes. Et donc, il nous faut, nous, clarifier la position commune que nous souhaitons prendre. Les parties prenantes à un nouveau traité, c'était jusqu'alors un traité bilatéral, je souhaite que l'Europe prenne ses responsabilités, qu'à la France le fera, qui est, comme vous le savez, une puissance dotée, et que nous puissions ensuite, une fois cette coordination faite, engager un nouveau dialogue, un nouveau débat avec les Russes pour répondre à ce problème de sécurité et de désarmement sur notre propre sol.
And I think the situation in Ukraine is very important. I think that the meetings coming up with Russia and Ukraine are very important. And there's a possibility that some very big progress can be made. It's very important for Ukraine. I think it's very important from the standpoint of Russia also that they work out a treaty, they work out peace, because they've been fighting a long time, too long. And I think there's a really good chance that will happen. Also, with respect to nuclear weapons, I've spoken to President Putin, and I've communicated with him, and he very much wants to, and so do we, work out a treaty of some kind on nuclear weapons. That will probably then include China at some point, and yourselves, by the way, but it'll include China and some other countries. But we intend to see if we can work something out to stop the proliferation, to stop what's happening, because we are making a lot and we are renovating a lot. And frankly, the whole situation with nuclear is not a good situation. We ended the treaty because it wasn't being adhered to by the other side, but they want to make a treaty, and so do we, and I think it would be a great thing. I think it's one of the most important things we can do, frankly. So we're going to be dealing with Russia on a treaty where we really, and we're focused on nuclear and nuclear weapons, missiles, but nuclear weapons, and we think something can be worked out. We think they want to do it. We know they want to do it, and we want to do it also. I spoke to China about it. During one of our trade negotiations, they were extremely excited about getting involved in that. So some very good things can happen with respect to that. And I think it's very important. The whole nuclear situation, very, very important. Okay? Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
That is the president with Macron talking before their bilateral. Covered a bunch of different topics, ISIS, Syria, Turkey, obviously NATO, the digital tax. Not much of a chance for the president, guys, to walk back his earlier comments this morning about China trade. And because of that, the Dow is down 375. Hasn't really had a chance to bounce at all. You lost 3,100 for the first time since November 22nd. Semis, biggest gap down since August, according to Bespoke. And the VIX, almost 17.5, is going to take you back a couple of months. So the market reaction still echoing off of what the president, David, said earlier this morning about China trade.
Yeah, but as you pointed out, I think on Twitter, Carl, we did not really get a key question in that setting just now that we were watching for the last 30 minutes or so about China specifically, so that if there was an opportunity to walk anything back in terms of what the president said earlier, he didn't have it. Not that he would have necessarily. There were some questions, of course, more about, as you said, NATO, and also the digital tax that's being applied in France, which is a hard thing to sort of figure out in some ways in terms of French users of services and that 3% tax, and this potential additional taxes that could go back and forth.
Yeah. He did call it a minor dispute.
Tariffs, I should say.
Right, the digital tax, minor dispute that he thought could be worked out. So we got some information out of that presser right there. In the meantime, welcome back, guys. You're watching Squawk in the Street. I'm Carl Quintanilla with David Faber, Leslie Picker, who's in for Sarah Eisen at Post 9 of the New York Stock Exchange. Moments from now, we're going to talk to the Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross, about today's trade headlines and the market response. In the meantime, as we said earlier, Dow down 400 and below 3,100 for the first time in a couple of weeks.
And certainly not recouping any of those losses, given the conversation that we just heard with the president. But we'll see. We have a lot of questions for Secretary Ross, so hopefully, we get some answers from him.
We begin though in London to get the latest from that NATO summit. Steve Sedgwick has more for us this morning. Steve.
Yeah, actually quite extraordinary time here in London, everybody, because, we've literally just seen Frau Merkel come in and walk into number 10 Downing Street, where she will be in a meeting hosted by the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Mr. Erdogan, the Turkish President, and Mr. Macron, who we were just hearing there talking with the President, Mr. Trump, will also be joining that meeting. They will be discussing the thorny issue regarding Syria, regarding Turkey as well. But an enormous number of issues being covered at these meetings, as you've been alluding to already. Mr. Trump making comments about China this morning, as you say, making the market shudder, actually steering clear this morning for once on the matter of the UK election, saying he could work with anybody and that he had no interest, and US pharmaceutical companies had no interest in taking hold great lumps of the National Health Service. And of course, the president being very cognizant that we are amidst a general election here in the United Kingdom at the moment. So Boris Johnson, of course, very nervous if the president were to say anything about the National Health Service, or indeed show some form of support for himself and get involved in the UK election in some way. The comments just now, though, regarding a whole host of issues, as you mentioned, digital taxes, the future of NATO, also being raised across these 3 days of meetings. The president, again, being, I thought, incredibly diplomatic, saying they intend to make a whole host of progress with Monsieur Macron, of course, and Macron saying that the organisation NATO was brain dead, which is very interesting because the previous big critic of NATO had been the president overspending, but he's been lauding over the last couple of days the fact that since he made his comments about the lack of spending going on, $130 billion extra per year was being spent by NATO members. Let me hand it back to you guys.
All right, Steve, I doubt we're done with headlines for the day. We'll talk to you soon. Our Steve Sedgwick covering the NATO summit in London. Markets obviously down on those presidential comments from earlier this morning regarding China. Dow session low down 427. Joining us to discuss this and a lot more is Goldman's chief U.S. equity strategist, David Kostin, who's here at Post 9. David, good morning to you.
Morning, Carl.
How much of your 2020 outlook is contingent on a phase one deal?
Reality, not so much. Think about what's happening. It's certainly contributing to a high level of corporate uncertainty. CEO confidence is the lowest it's been in a decade. But the consumer confidence is extremely high. And 70% of the U.S. economy is represented by the consumer. And we think about unemployment rate, lowest in 50 years. We have wages that are rising 3.5%, so well above inflation. You have the Fed on hold for probably through the election. and consumer balance sheets have been delevered for the last decade. So from the consumer side, very, very strong. And that's really a driver of the overall profit economic forecast. But certainly the trade is a topic for lots of discussion, and it's, I think, contributing to a lot of the CEO kind of anxiety about business activity for next year.
And yet Matt Maley points out in his morning note this morning that this is the third time in 7 to 8 months that comments by President Trump have sent the market lower. On average, you see declines of about 6% over the week for the S&P. So do you expect the same this time based on some of his comments this morning? Or do you expect it to be potentially even steeper declines? Or do you think the market will shrug this off over time?
So we certainly have a mercurial president, and different days you have different tweets and commentary. So hard to forecast the vicissitudes of that. But if you look out, target at the end of this year, the S&P 500 is 3,100. So we're pretty much around that level. And if you look into next year, the backdrop of economic activity and growth should suggest that profits will rise 5 to 6%, and that will support a U.S. equity market that will rise towards 3,400 at the end of next year. So that's the general trajectory. You can look at the trading around that. If I were to put that on a path, you're looking at market rising perhaps towards 3,250, maybe up about 5% from now through the primaries, basically end of February, early March. You get a pretty good understanding of who the candidate will be on the Democratic side, and that's basically where the market's likely to be for most of the year through the election. And then at that point, this uncertainty, this great uncertainty about policy, et cetera, will be resolved one way or the other. Most likely, you'll have a divided government in some fashion, Senate, House, the White House. And as a result of that, you'll have another P expansion towards the end of the year. That'll be my lay of the land roadmap for I know you always talk about the roadmap for the next hour on CNBC, so this will be the roadmap for the next year.
Yeah, well, speaking of next year as well, and reading through your very nice booklet here, they give you a nice publishing budget to Goldman, don't they, David? Growth versus value. You asked the question, what should it be, given we've seen a resurgence in part of this year, at least in value. But you kind of punt, David. You say neither one, just go for growth at a reasonable price. Why not choose growth or value as we had?
So it's great. I would say I would respond saying it's not a punt. It's actually growth at a reasonable price, which is a combination of both. And here's the thought process. The thought process, your spread between high and low value companies is extremely wide. One of the widest has been in decades. And that would historically be consistent with value stocks outperforming. But value indicators is not necessarily a time indicator. So value is likely to do well over a multi-year period. So if I sit here today and say 3 years from now, value is likely to be the winning strategy. Can I say that specifically for 2020? Not necessarily. The data does not support that view. So that's sort of the value side of it. On the growth side, normally in an economic environment, sort of modest, what I call it 0 to 3%, not a contraction, not an extraordinary expansion. In that modest growth backdrop, that's when growth stocks do better. And so in that environment, sort of value and growth, that's the rationale for why we arrive at kind of growth at a reasonable price. The way we think about coming up with a bunch of stocks that are in that category would be those that are above the fastest growth within a sector, but aren't at the most extreme on the highest valuation, nor the one to buy is kind of the cheapest stock. So you look at some of the companies there, Alphabet's there, Raytheon's there, Lockheed Martin, some companies in industrial, some companies in technology, the consumer area. That's basically how we would set up a portfolio now, and that's, I think, the discussion. But it's a legitimate question. A lot of questions from clients about growth versus value in this environment.
A lot of people want value to come. They want to know that it's really going to be a value-oriented market.
So the way to think about value-oriented market is to look at dividends and the sort of a dividend strategy, which is a way of capturing value but getting paid to wait. And if you look about a portfolio of companies with basically a high dividend yield, not just high dividend yield, but high expected dividend growth. And think about that as an investor today. What's your yield on cost? You buy the shares today. What's your return on cost, say, at the end of next year? That's an approach to do it. And that's a bunch of stocks that are with those characteristics. That's the way I think about that process.
Really quick, if we're in for a more prolonged back and forth with the Chinese, does that change Fed calculus at this point, or is that already set in stone, you think?
Well, the comments from Chair Powell would suggest that there's a pretty high bar for them to move one direction or another. That would suggest in our forecast at Goldman Sachs that there's no Fed movement, no Fed hike or cut through after the election, sometime in 2021. So that's a pretty benign backdrop from a rates perspective, and that is supporting a higher level of valuation in the market. So think about it, there's really two drivers of the market. You got the earnings and you got your valuation. So what is it telling us about earnings? And basically a pretty modest inflation story and a rate story and a pretty strong consumer, which suggests earnings are going to rise around 5 to 6% next year. So that's sort of your earnings growth. And the valuation, your PE multiple around 18 times. What are the key drivers of that? It's really consumer confidence and uncertainty. And so the points to your question about the president and some of the uncertainty about trade, that would lead to a higher level of uncertainty, a lower valuation. But eventually that'll get resolved. In our view, as an investor, we really look at some of the fundamentals. That will lead to a slight expansion of the PE multiple at the end of next year.
That's good stuff. David, thanks for clarifying some things coming out of that bilateral. David Costa.
Good to see you.
When we come back, the Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross, is here. Going to join us on set, talk about today's trade headlines and a lot more. Later on, best-selling author Michael Lewis talks about the Trump presidency, the political economy, and a lot more. A big show still ahead. Dow's down 420.
So what are you working on?
Christmas, a time for sharing gifts and laughter, and photos and videos. Make the most of it with a SIM-only deal packed with data from Tesco Mobile. Like a 10-gig SIM for just £13 a month. It's just one of the ways we're celebrating 100 years of great value. Go in store or search Tesco Mobile today. Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
Ends 29th of December. 12-month contract and unlocked 4G-enabled phone required. Terms apply. See tescomobile.com/terms.
I used to be a bit of a rubbish sleeper. I'd toss and turn all night. And somehow I could never find the comfy bit of the mattress. It was a proper nightmare. That's what brought me here. Testing mattresses in the Which Test Lab. We use a custom-made barrel rolling machine to simulate a decade's worth of use. And the mattresses that perform best are the only ones we recommend for your bedroom.
Which tests harder so you can buy smarter. Visit which.co.uk.
This week at Tesco, buy 2 items from our chilled party food range, like tempura prawns or mozzarella sticks, and get a third one free. So for every 2 people you invite, you can ask another for free. But who? Linda from Accounts or Julio from Magaluf 2010. Tesco, delivering Christmas for 100 years. Cheapest item free selected stores while stocks last. Ends 1st of January.
Want to hear about the latest and greatest things to listen to on TuneIn? For reminders of the biggest live sports games, debates, and breaking news stories, follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to stay connected with the audio that matters to you.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? We've got you covered. With TuneIn Premium, you can listen to every NFL game live as it's happening.
LaShawn McCoy has an opening on the right side, punches into the end zone for the touchdown.
Or catch it later on demand.
Offset backs behind Mahomes. The give is to Williams. Starts right, cuts it back to the left, and blows into the end zone for the touchdown.
You call the plays. Follow the NFL anytime, anywhere, all season long with TuneIn Premium. Upgrade today.
Whether you call yourself a Democrat, Republican, Independent, or something else, the road to 2020 is on TuneIn.
What a night! And a complete earthquake. This was
Follow every step of the Democratic primaries while hearing the latest headlines from the White House with live 24-hour news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox News Talk, and more.
We're closing in on the first results in the battle for the White House.
Experience the election through the sources you trust with the nonstop news channels on TuneIn.
Well, markets, of course, are down this morning. This largely on comments from President Trump that a trade deal might not get done until after the 2020 election. Joining us now at Post 9 to perhaps shed some light on these latest comments regarding the trade talks is Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross. Mr. Secretary, always good to have you here.
Good to be back.
And nice to have you in person as well. It seemed as though, given the recent commentary, things were getting closer and closer to a phase 1 deal being signed with the Chinese. Should we view the president's comments out of London as a moment where things have changed in some fashion that we may be unaware of so that it becomes less likely a deal is near?
Well, the president's objective always has been to get the right deal, independently of when or anything else like that. So his objectives haven't changed. And if we don't have a deal, he's perfectly happy to continue with the tariffs as he had. So he feels we're in a pretty good position one way or the other. I think the new variable is the whole Hong Kong situation. That's complicated life for President Xi. Then, as you know, they got somewhat upset when the president signed the bill.
Right.
Well, the reality is that bill was going to be enacted anyway because they had a veto-proof majority in the Congress. So that's only a technical issue whether the president signed it or not. Nonetheless, they did announce the retaliation about the Navy vessels not going into Hong Kong. That's not a big deal. We can very well live without the port of Hong Kong. So that one I thought was fairly modest. But, you know, when you're dealing in international things, everything affects everything.
Yeah, understood. But it does seem as well that the Chinese have made it clear that they would expect some sort of, well, not just no tariffs on the 15th of December, which is only 12 days away at this point, but also a potential rollback of the September tariffs. Is that the case as you understand it in terms of what their ask is? And is that something that has put a new impediment in the way of perhaps reaching a deal in the near term?
Well, the idea of addressing existing tariffs over a period of time is not a new idea. That's always been part of things. The real question is the total package. So I don't think it's too useful to pick out one little piece or another. We should really focus. Either we're going to have a total package that works for both, or we'll continue on as we are. I think it's also important that the president make clear he's under no time pressure to get it done. Because otherwise there's a tendency of the other side to say, oh, he needs it for political reasons, so we'll give him a worse deal than we would. He's not going to play that game.
But he made that clear today. Is it your expectation that December 15th tariffs will be applied?
Well, unless there's some real reason to postpone them. If there were a little bit of time needed for more talks, he probably would postpone it. If enough substantive progress had been made, he might. You really have to look at the exact situation as we get a little closer to that time.
Is he serious when he says it might be better to delay it to after the election? And what would the consequences be from that?
Well, I think he's serious, certainly in this regard. That takes off the table something that they may think gives them some leverage. Because once the election occurs, and the president seems to be in very good shape for the election, once it occurs and he's back in, now that's no longer a distraction that could detract from our negotiating position.
But ultimately, I mean, even if he does get reelected, that's 4 more years. I mean, they still kind of have that leverage on the table because we have a democratic system here, right?
Well, we have the leverage because we have much more ammunition left against them than they have against us. It's one of the few good things about a trade deficit is you have more bullets you can fire than they have that they can fire. They're pretty well out of bullets.
Well, so how are you feeling about things? I mean, we have talked about this issue now with you for years at this point. We've had sort of the same conversation. Are you optimistic still that something will get done in the next, let's call it, few months?
Well, I'm optimistic we'll eventually get something done for several reasons. One, they have their own economic problems in China, particularly the hollowing out of these supply chains that's occurring. Even before the trade disputes, there were people starting to think maybe China's not the cheapest place in the world to manufacture anymore. Now, with all this uncertainty, there's a clear movement of supply chains over to Vietnam, to Malaysia, to Bangladesh, to all kinds of other countries. That's a trend that's going to continue, especially as long as there's the trade uncertainty.
But aren't the new steel and aluminum tariffs on Brazil and Argentina, some want to argue that that's an admission that they do have partners, China. They do have global partners who are willing to work with them and supply them.
Well, I don't think the Brazil and Argentina things have anything to do with China. We're Brazil's main customer for steel. That's why they're so upset about it. Brazil ships us over 4 million tons a year of semi-finished, and that's over 4% of our total steel consumption. So they're a very important player here. But the president's reasoning that he announced for putting the tariffs was not anything about China. It was about currency manipulation.
I'd like to come back to this idea of the next 12 days and December 15th, because it's certainly being watched closely by the market as a barometer of how far or how much progress has been made. I mean, it's only a week and a half or so.
Right.
What are you expecting between now and then that conceivably could change the way you're looking at it so that they would not be applied, those tariffs?
Well, there is always the chance of a breakthrough, and everybody is hoping for that. I do agree with the president. The Chinese want a deal. We want a deal. But it has to be a deal that's appropriate.
I thought we'd had a breakthrough already. I mean, that seems to be the sense of many people, that we've made that breakthrough.
You don't have a breakthrough until it's in black and white, on paper, signed, sealed, and delivered. What we had was an agreement at the 40,000-foot level, 40 to 50 billion of agricultural purchases, things of that. But going from there to what will it actually be, what will be the products, how do you deal with pricing, how do you deal with market conditions, how do you deal with the contingency that they don't perform? Those are all questions that you don't deal with at the 40,000-foot level, but you must deal with to make a real deal.
Why then announce the agreement in principle a couple of months ago when there was so much space between that and a signed deal?
Well, you always announce things as you make progress, and that was a big step. That's the first time the Chinese have gotten to that big a number. So that was an important breakthrough. 40, 50 billion is a huge number relative to American agriculture. So it's an important figure.
But you don't regret announcing phase one, given the expectations it set up for the market?
No, look, here on the floor of the exchange of all places, we're a full disclosure country. So the idea that you would want to keep out of the market the news that kind of an agreement in principle had been reached, I don't think would have been a very good idea.
What are your expectations then in terms of near-term talks? Can we expect Trade Rep Lighthizer, Secretary Mnuchin, yourself to be engaged at all in the next few days?
There's constant engagement at the staff level, and that will continue. There's no big meeting scheduled right now, and there certainly is no signing date scheduled.
So given that and the hurdles that you outlined earlier, what do you think is the likelihood that in the next week and a half we do reach some sort of agreement before those tariffs?
It's your job to focus on each week, each day, each hour, each eighth, each quarter. It's our job to try to get a proper deal done. So we're really focusing on getting the right deal done, not whether it's done at 4:45 on a particular day.
Turning to Europe for a second, if we can, to where the president is right now, of course. He seems perturbed by this digital tax and raised the prospect, Secretary, of 100% tariff on wine and cheese coming from France. Is that a real possibility?
Well, remember, the context in which we're talking is we just won the WTO case of Airbus versus Boeing. That gives a great deal of latitude in terms of what the president can do. Europe has consistently not lived up to the WTO rules. They've consistently said they were and consistently not followed through. So we have a very legitimate complaint. They dragged this out for, 12, 13 years, but now it's the reckoning day. So he has flexibility to do tariffs.
Macron just said that the digital tax does not target the U.S. specifically. Do you disagree with that?
Oh, absolutely. When you set criteria that if you have so many sales internationally and so much sales in a given country, and there's only a handful of companies that meet those criteria, and by and large they're all American, it's hard to say that it wasn't designed as an anti-American thing.
And France isn't the only country that's considering a digital tax. You've got Italy looking to impose one.
Well, they're not the only country that's anti-American either.
Would view them as anti-American?
Pardon me?
What does that mean when you say that?
Well, they are anti-American in the sense that Europe doesn't have the real high-tech champions and the real e-commerce champions that we do. There's a tremendous amount of jealousy about that. I view this as having that as one of its roots, and the other, they're all running budget deficits. They're all looking for a way to tax someone other than their own voters. So there's that motive as well, because our companies don't get to vote in France. They don't get to vote in Germany.
No, but they're selling a lot of services, which is hard to sort of, it's not a product, so to speak, that we're accustomed to on a shelf. But that's the way, I mean, more and more of the world's commerce is about services.
Well, it is. And if what they said was everybody doing any of those industries from penny one paid the tax on every dollar, that would be one thing. But that's not. They've set very specific criteria, and the criteria, deliberately or not, essentially only include American companies.
So then if you start down this path of imposing tariffs on France as, retaliation for this digital tax, do you then see yourself imposing tariffs on the other countries, Italy, the UK, Turkey, that are considering?
Well, it remains to be seen. If they do the same thing, I would assume he would react the same way. But you certainly can impose tax on individual member states. That's plenty of precedent for that. You can't negotiate a trade agreement with individual member states. That has to be at the European Commission level. But you can, and we have. The Airbus retaliations are against the member countries individually. They're tailored to the individual countries. So there's nothing strange about that.
Reuters has a piece out today, says the White House considered kicking Huawei out of the banking system, where they would be unable essentially to transact in dollars, and that it's not completely off the table.
Well, the only thing we've done on Huawei so far is we put them on the entity list. And that means any American company that wants to sell them stuff that's on the list has to get a license to do so. We have very serious concerns about Huawei as a security risk. We had very big concerns about what they contributed to the horrible treatment of the Uyghurs in China. There are a lot of problems with Huawei. They have a very checkered history.
Is that a confirmation of the Reuters piece?
I didn't see the Reuters piece.
That Treasury considered putting them on a list, barring them from transacting in dollars.
Well, we're always considering all sorts of measures against all kinds of companies, but I don't believe there's anything imminent this morning on that score.
Do you believe China's going to have an entities list of their own? And who do you think would be on it?
Well, it's an interesting question. I'm not aware that we use in our national defense anything that comes from China. So if they do have an entity list, it'd be very interesting to see who they think from America belongs on it. I think it's a very difficult problem.
Finally, Mr. Secretary, just to get your general views, what are you hearing from American or U.S. businesses, particularly those that operate around the globe? We talk often here about the strength of the U.S. consumer, but the enterprise, there has been some concerns in terms of wanting to spend money with the uncertainty out there, specifically about the trade war itself. What are you hearing?
Well, the multinationals are obviously very concerned by their very nature. Everybody in business, what do you want? You want certainty, you want peace and quietude, you want to be allowed to do what you want to do. So it's not surprising that some of them would have concern about anything that could interrupt the pace of things.
Mr. Secretary, always appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. Good to be on.
Thank you for stopping by. Wilbur Ross, of course, the Secretary of Commerce.
Yeah, I was having withdrawal symptoms.
Yeah, well, I know. It's been a while, so we're glad to see you.
Speaking of all that, Dow's down 409. Let's get to Rahel Solomon and get a news update at this hour. Hi, Rahel.
Hi, Carl. Well, the Fed and other regulators are clarifying rules for financial services related to hemp businesses. So banks will no longer be required to file so-called suspicious activity reports for customers solely because they're involved in the pot business. The financial firms will only need to take action if there is suspicious activity. Popular video sharing app TikTok has been accused in a lawsuit of transferring private user data to servers in China. TikTok has said in the past that it stores all U.S. user data in the U.S. One person is dead, another injured after a shooting yesterday at a Pennsylvania movie theater. So this happened in West Manchester Township. Employees say that the shooting happened inside the Regal Cinemas building, but not the actual theater. And finally, another piece of history has been added to the George Bush Presidential Library in College Station, Texas. It's a bronze, life-size replica of Bush's faithful service dog, Sully. The service dog spent the final 6 months with the president before he passed. And you are up to date. That is our CNBC News update for this hour. Leslie, I'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Rahel. Good-looking statue there. It's now time for our ETF Spotlight. Take a look at the VanEck Vector Semiconductors ETF, ticker SMH, falling sharply as the broader market sells off this morning on Trump trade comments. AMD, NVIDIA, Intel, Broadcom, and Qualcomm all in the red. AMD posted a 15% jump in November, making it the NASDAQ 100's fourth best performer last month.
We're going to keep our eyes on the markets, obviously. Dow session low around 420 and change. We're going to watch the NATO summit as that bilateral continues between Macron and the president. And we'll be able to handle some headlines this afternoon regarding corporate news. Salesforce and Workday, in particular, have earnings after the bell. We'll get a check on cloud, but there's a live shot of what's happening at the site in London at the NATO summit.
And it's certainly been a red December so far with the first 2 days
we do
in the red.
support them totally and have supported them from the beginning. The question was asked, do we support them, I thought, financially? And we haven't supported them. I don't know that we've ever been actually asked to support them financially. And somebody asked, maybe we would. But we support them very, very seriously. The people that are protesting in Iran, they're looking for their freedom. And we are fully in support of them. So I wanted to, just in case anybody had any questions, we haven't been asked to support them financially, which I assume that's what the question was, just to make sure everybody understood it. It's an honor to be with a friend of mine who just had a great election victory. Congratulations.
Thank you, Donald.
And done a very good job. And we actually have a very good relationship, and a good relationship in terms of our countries. We're working on the USMCA. We're trying to get Nancy Pelosi to put it up for a vote. You know, if it gets put up for a vote, it passes. But so far, she hasn't decided to do that. It's up to her. It's actually a single individual as the Speaker of the House. It's that person's decision, and she's the Speaker of the House. And it's a great deal for Mexico and for Canada and for the United States. And it's a lot of jobs for everybody, and it replaces a deal that's really a lousy deal, a bad deal for... I can tell you what I would say for the United States, that the deal that we have right now is terrible. NAFTA, terrible. It's been a terrible deal for the United States. So we look forward to being able to take the vote on USMCA. It's been there for a long time. And at some point, perhaps the president of Mexico, we have a wonderful man there, you know. He really is. He's been a wonderful man. They'll get tired, and the prime minister will get tired. He'll say, look, let's forget this deal. And I could understand it if you did. It's been sitting in Congress now for 6 or 7 months, and it's a great deal for everybody. So hopefully they can get it done and get it done fast. And it's one of the few transactions I think all three countries benefit, really as a unit against the world, if you look at it. It really is a unit against the world. And that's the way we looked at it right from the beginning, so we hope that's the case. Again, congratulations. We're going to be talking about a number of subjects, including additional trade to that, and the military and the military presence, and it's great being at NATO. We had some real success, I think, and some very successful talks having to do with NATO. As you know, a lot of the countries have stepped up, and they're putting in at least 130, probably the exact number is $131 billion more, and that's great. And they have commitments for $400 billion, so it really has become a force. And as we've discussed in the past, there's going to be great flexibility shown now with NATO. We can go to other parts of the world, not just one focus. It's a lot of focuses, and we need a lot of focuses. We need a lot of focus. We'll be looking at other forms of terror. We'll be looking at other countries. We'll be looking at countries that are aggressive, and not just one particular part of this world. So I think NATO's become a very big factor over the last 2 or 3 years. You've been involved. I've been involved. and a lot of good things have happened, and it's great to have you here. Thank you very much. And congratulations.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be sitting down with President Trump. The relationship between Canada and the United States is incredibly strong. I don't think it's ever been stronger. Our work together on the USMCA as we move forward towards ratification has been really tremendous. It's been a great process working with between your team and our team, working with the Mexicans as well. We know that we're here for NATO, a 70th anniversary, extremely important. The American strength in ensuring that people are stepping up in terms of their military investments is certainly something we've recognized in Canada. We're increasing our defense investments by 70% over these 10 years because we know that making sure that everyone is there to step up and deliver is really important. We have an enhanced forward battle group in Latvia. We're leading the command mission in Baghdad. Canadians are a strong part of this alliance and will continue to be. But this is just a great opportunity for me to sit down with the President and talk about the many issues in which we align and we work together. C'est un grand plaisir d'être ici avec le Président Trump pour parler de la NATO, pour parler de l'OTAN, de parler de nos relations privilégiées.
That sounded very good. Any questions?
Yeah, Mr. President, climate change is a top priority for the Prime Minister here as well as for President Macron earlier. We've not heard you talk about it on this trip. It doesn't appear to be on your agenda. Are you thinking about that issue?
I think about it all the time, Phil, and honestly, climate change is very important to me. And, you know, I've done many environmental impact statements over my life, and I believe very strongly in very, very crystal clear, clean water and clean air. That's a big part of climate change. I also see what's happening with our oceans, where certain countries are dumping unlimited loads of things in and they float. They tend to float toward the United States. I see that happening, and nobody's ever seen anything like it, and it's gotten worse. But no, it's very important to me also. But I want clean air and clean water. That would be number one and number two. Very important.
Are you concerned about rising sea levels and all that?
You know, I'm concerned about everything, but I'm also concerned about nuclear proliferation, which I think is a very important topic, and it's a topic that we're going to discuss today. The whole situation with nuclear to me is very, very important, as we've been discussing today at the various meetings that we've had. I think that's something that has to be taken care of, and it has to be dealt with very strongly. Okay?
Mr. President, are you happy with Canadian defense spending as it is right now?
Say it?
Are you happy with Canadian defense spending as it is right now?
Well, they're moving up, and they're moving up substantially, and they're starting to do very well economically, and that has something to do with it. And yeah, they're getting up to a level that's getting to be very acceptable. They have been under the 2%, obviously, but they're moving up. We discuss it. I'm satisfied.
Mr. President.
Excuse me?
You plan to discuss Huawei?
We'll discuss that. Yes, we'll discuss that. We'll be discussing that, yes.
What's your message to the Prime Minister about Huawei and using it in the next generation cell phone networks in Canada?
Well, we find a security problem with it, and Canada is going to make a decision at some point. But we find, I just speak for the United States, and we have ability to do a lot of things. We've actually advanced very far on 5G, much further than anyone really knows. Ajit Pai has headed it up, and he's very good, and we have a lot of action going on with respect to 5G. We're not using Huawei, and we're really some of our great companies are getting much involved with 5G right now. But no, we find a tremendous security problem with respect to Huawei.
Mr. President, on the nuclear issue, your comments a little earlier about the governments of Russia and China trying to come to the table on some sort of agreement on nuclear non-proliferation. That your description of those conversations that you've had with those leaders doesn't really match with what they've said publicly. I was hoping you might be able to elaborate. What was the last time?
Is that what they said publicly?
Yeah.
We've had discussions, and we've also had communications. And I can tell you on behalf of both, they'd like to see something done with it. Now, does that mean they'll agree to do so? I'm the one that terminated the agreement. And I terminated it because they were not living it up to it. And we don't want to be living up to an agreement, and they don't. And so it wasn't fair. But it was also a very obsolete agreement. You know, it covered things that frankly didn't matter anymore. We are looking at doing a new agreement with Russia, and we're looking at doing a new agreement with China, and maybe the three of us will do it together. And they do want to do it. I can tell you that with China, we were at a trade meeting, and the subject, I broached the subject, and they were very excited about it. No, they'd like to do it. We may do it with Russia first and then go to China, or we may do it all together, or it may not happen. I mean, to be honest with you, maybe it won't happen. But we are spending a lot of money on nuclear, and we have new nuclear, and we have tremendous renovations of our older capability. And I have to tell you, I see the kind of damage that we're talking about and the kind of power that we have. And it'd be a very sad day if we ever had to use it. It's a very good thing if we could do something to stop making that, fixing that. We'll see what happens. Now, there are other countries, but in terms of the world, we're number one by far. Russia's number two, and China would be number three. China will be, pretty even over a period of 4 or 5 years. But it's a tremendous expense for them and for us, for everybody. The destructive capability is really unacceptable. So we'll see if we can do something. I think Russia and I think China would like to do it very much.
President Trump, on spending, has called member countries and allied countries in the past delinquent for not meeting the 2% standard. Where would you put Canada in that, as they're not?
Slightly delinquent, I'd say, Canada, but they'll be okay. I have confidence. Just slightly delinquent. But some are major delinquent. Some are way below 1%, and that's unacceptable. And then if something happens, we're supposed to protect them, and it's not really fair, and it never has been fair. And they're paying up. We are talking to Germany tomorrow, and they're starting to come along. They have to. They have to. Otherwise, if they don't want to, I'll have to do something with respect to trade.
So Canada's okay?
And with trade, I have all the cards. We have built something in the last 3 years that's been incredible. You've seen it. We're up $21 trillion. And China's down about $32 trillion. And as you know, for years I've been hearing that it was 2019. In 2019, China's going to become the largest economy. Well, that didn't happen. We're much larger than China now because we've gone up and they've gone down. And they've had their worst year in 56 or 57 years now. By far, they've had the worst year that they've had that they know of. And we don't want that, frankly. But what they were doing was wrong.
Mr. President,
I think they're going to stop it, and they want to make a deal very badly. Yes.
On that question, would you commit if there's a country that's delinquent, as you put it, in paying for their defense spending? Would you commit as President of the United States to defend them if they were attacked?
Well, I'm going to be discussing that today, and it's a very interesting question, isn't it? And it also depends on what your definition of delinquent is. For instance, if you have a country that's paying only 1%, and you have some that are paying less than 1%, and they shouldn't be. You have some that are paying less than 1%, and they're wealthy countries on top of everything. Now we go to a new year, and they don't pay. And now we go to yet another year, and they don't pay. Well, now I ask you, do they have to pay for the back years? Okay? Now, so why is it that they owe us for this year, but every time a new year comes out, they don't have to pay? It's wrong. It's not right. So, I could say that you could go back 25 years. I won't do that with Canada, of course. But you could go back, right from the beginning, where they were short of whatever goal it was at the time. It's 2% now. 2% is very low. It should be 4%. 2% is very low. But you have some that are well short of that. But they were short of it last year, the year before, the year before, the year before, right? So they're short all these years. Well, in theory, you don't just say, that's okay, you don't have to have a pay. They really owe all that money from the past. That's the way I look at it. If Germany, as an example, is paying 1%, and they're supposed to be paying 2%, you're talking about billions of dollars. Well, that means that last year, the year before, all of those years, they would owe us money. You're talking about trillions of dollars. Nobody's ever brought that up. They just keep talking about the present. So if they're short 1 year, and then you go into the new year, they never talk about the year that they didn't pay. But they actually, in theory, owe us that money. It's not fair. It's not fair.
Mr. President, as regards China, when you met the Prime Minister in June, you talked about trying to help with the 2 prisoners that are Canadians that are in China.
Yeah.
Have you made any?
Well, I have, and I think we've made progress. And I had mentioned that to President Xi, as you know, because it was a big subject at the time. And I just hope they're being treated well. But I put in a very, very strong word for those 2 prisoners. Now, I haven't spoken to them recently, to be honest with you.
That is the president with Trudeau, another bilateral at the NATO summit, covering again a wide range of topics, 5G, climate change, USMCA, but any further news about a China trade deal, David's kind of been the hole of the donut this morning, and that's why the Dow has been unable to rally.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly put many of those same questions to Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross when he joined us a few moments ago. I can't say that I got anything that I would think was positive, although the market did come off the lows, broadly speaking, since the earlier moments in the session. Well, actually, yeah, we're kind of back towards them right now.
Yeah, close to session lows here. I think one headline out of Ross that kind of didn't help was that there are no high-level talks scheduled, he said, between now and the 15th.
Just staff conversations. He did indicate that there could be progress over the next 12 days prior to the December 15th tariffs going into place that could forestall those tariffs, but he certainly did not make it clear, as seemed to be the expectation only a couple of days ago, that they would not go into place.
And of course, mentioning all of the various hurdles that it would, that are in place between now and December 15th. But, as we mentioned, Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross joining us earlier and saying the president's objectives is to get the right deal done regardless of timing.
The president's objective always has been to get the right deal, independently of when or anything else like that. So his objectives haven't changed. And if we don't have a deal, he's perfectly happy to continue with the tariffs as he had. So he feels we're in a pretty good position one way or the other.
The when, of course, is looking ahead to the 2020 election and how the U.S. is positioned from a leverage standpoint relative to the Chinese, just given the fact that they are able to potentially hold the election over the U.S. as those negotiations proceed. So joining us now is the author of The Fifth Risk, which is out today in paperback. Michael Lewis, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So how do you make sense of some of this news this morning about these trade talks and how
I'm so glad I don't have to do it. I'm so glad I don't have your job, because I just watch what's happened to your job in the last 3 years. It's constant response to Trump. It's tweets, and it's like the president has taken upon himself to just make the market go up and down for fun. And I have no idea if any of what just got said is meaningful or meaningless. I don't know. And I certainly wouldn't be trying to trade on it in any way. So I view it almost as spectacle rather than information.
Although if you were still at a desk, you would have to trade on it.
You'd have no choice, right? You'd have no choice. You'd have to, what you'd want, ideally, is, what you'd want to do is, I'd have a team of people trying to predict, see the patterns in Trump's tweets, and figure out, what days he wakes up and says, oh, we're going to have deals, and what days he wakes up and says, oh, we're going to have tariffs. Because that's, it's the simplest trade in the market.
Yeah.
But in truth, I'm not paying a great deal of attention to this. And I'm sorry, but it's not.
Something you did pay attention to. I read your book some time ago, actually.
Yeah, last year.
When it came out in hardcover, and you spent a lot of time there talking about things we don't really talk about. In fact, don't talk about with the Commerce sector, even though you spent time focusing on that department, focusing on the Department of Energy, and sort of questioning whether we're being well served by the leadership there and what's sort of getting lost in the, well, now it's been years since the handoff.
Well, so the handoff, the beginning of the book was that they didn't have a transition, that they had all these people waiting to explain what happened in the Department of Commerce to the Secretary of Commerce, and he didn't particularly have any interest in it, in hearing about it. And so I use that as a jumping off point to sort of go figure out myself what was going on inside the Department of Commerce. And the things, in the end, what really interested me about the story and why it became a book was I found that when you kind of go into the government and you actually kind of start knocking on doors and seeing what people are doing behind them, it's unbelievably interesting. And it's just a different sort of person. The sort of person who's watching this show. They're not money people, and they aren't attention people. They're like mission people who've got some project.
And one of the things we looked at in the book was this idea of staffing and kind of the managerial concept of the presidency and how things have,
Well, this is it's an interesting thing about our country that distinguishes it from every other democracy, in that there is not a permanent civil service that's running things from the top down. There's actually a very shallow state rather than a deep state, because the president comes in and has the right to appoint 4,000 people who will run the operation. So it's like the one place. It's funny that we have this notion of the deep state, whereas they don't have it in France or in England or wherever, but because our state is in many ways the shallowest. It's the one that requires the most guidance from the executive. And so when the president comes in and actually exhibits just total indifference to running the government, it's more of a problem than it would be in the United Kingdom or in France, where they have a deep state that will take care of things.
I'm thinking of you played basketball with Obama. You spent a lot of time in the White House under that term.
When I wrote a piece,
yes.
I wrote a piece about him.
Yes, yeah. In Vanity Fair. Have you seen a piece that describes this White House that helps you understand it? Would you be interested in writing that piece?
If Donald Trump would invite me in the way Barack Obama invited me in to spend some time with him, I would love to write that piece. I think it's unlikely, but you never know. But you need to be there. It's funny. His presidency is so different. You need to be there at different times. Like with Obama, you want to be there when you might imagine you want to be there. There were a lot of official moments. With Trump, you want to be there in the morning when he got up and picked up his phone, right? Or when he went to bed at night watching television, or when he calls into Fox News. The nature of his presidency is so different. You sort of want a different kind of access. I don't know if he wants me in his bedroom.
I'd love to ask you sort of a broader question here in terms of you've been obviously very successful at creating a brand around yourself, writing a lot of books to support it. Now you've moved significantly into podcasting. It comes up a lot actually in the work we do. Spotify, large public company, heavily investing in podcasting. Pandora, part of Sirius, investing in podcasting. What has been your experience there? Is this something you think really does have legs in terms of its connection with the consumer?
I kind of got into it just because I had a really good friend named Jacob Weisberg who started a company, and he said, well, you want to do one? And I kind of did, just to see what it was like. I had no sense of whether it was actually going to work. I have been amazed at, first, the reach of the audience, how big the audience is. You can see building TV-sized audiences in this medium. The advertisers are figuring it out, because the level of attention you're getting and the relationship with the audience is very intimate. So I think that actually it isn't a fad. I think that it goes very well with how people now spend their attention. They divide it. So, and you can listen to a podcast and drive to work, or listen to a podcast and do your work. There's not much else like that out there. It's a fun medium. So I do think, I don't actually think, there are people who think it's kind of peak podcast when one of these podcast companies goes for a couple $100 million. I don't actually believe that. I think that they're going to be, they have the potential to be really important media companies.
Even though curation is so difficult, right? Not everybody has a Michael Lewis brand and can float to the top.
You keep calling me a brand. I think of myself as just like a writer floating out there in the wilderness. But I'm deadly serious.
It's been a quarter century now.
But I don't think of it as I just don't think of it that way.
Well, that's how we think of things.
You think yeah. So
you may not have recognized you were developing
I got something I can destroy. I can destroy my brand.
No, don't do that.
I won't do that. But I think, how do I think it? I think it, for me, it's just another way to tell a story. And there are different kinds of stories that work really well there that wouldn't work so well in print. So for me, it's just additive. It's fantastic.
But you can make money at it too, right?
You can make money at it. Yeah, and I think that you will be able to make much more money at it as the advertisers sort of work out what's going on.
And you can get inspired for potential print pieces later on.
That's true. You've seen the boom in quality. There's a reason. Talent is moving to it, and there's a reason for that. They smell an audience.
As we're talking, the president circling back to the president, made a comment about the Dow drop today a few moments ago. Take a listen to this.
the China trade deal extending past.
That's okay. Well, it's up. Let me tell you, we took it up. It was about at 16,000 or 15,000, and now it's almost at 30,000. It's going to be at 30,000. No, I have to tell you, if it's not going to be a good deal, I'm not signing a deal. It's peanuts compared to what we have picked up. Record numbers in our stock markets, so that's okay. I mean, that's the way I feel. I have to make the right deal. I'm not going to make a deal that's not going to be great for our country. And it can't be an even deal. If it's an even deal, it's no good, because China, other presidents and leaders of our country have really let us down because they let China get away with something that should have never been allowed to happen. Billions and billions of dollars a year were lost in dealing with China by foolish people, or by people that didn't care, or by people that didn't know how. We rebuilt China, and I give China great credit. And I don't even blame China, because our people should have done what they did. But what they've done is we've lost 150 billion, then 200 billion, then 400 billion. To China. They rebuilt China with the money that they took out of the United States. And that's where they were, and that's where it is. Now we're taking in billions of dollars in tariffs. And by the way, they're eating it. You know, remember you used to tell me how it'll cost us. They're eating that money because they don't want to lose their supply chains. And I don't want them to lose their supply chains. But if it happens, and that's where it is. They want to make a deal. But I like the deal that we have, and the deal that we have could get even better, and I could do it all by myself. So we'll see what happens. We're at a critical stage. They've called us today, and they've called us yesterday. We're having ongoing discussions, and we'll see what happens. But if the stock market goes up or down, I don't watch the stock market. I watch jobs. Jobs are what I watch. I watch making the proper deal. We've been taken advantage of, the United States, by China for so many years at numbers that if you were doing this, you wouldn't have believed it. I came in, I looked at numbers ever since the founding or China's entrance into the World Trade Organization, the WTO.
That is the president with a pretty nice crystallization of his view of how China built their economy on stolen IP, and now it's time to pay the piper. Listening to him say, I don't watch the stock market, seems a little fanciful, given that he tends to be a little firmer on his trade rhetoric when the market's close to all-time highs.
Yeah. So, you know, when he frames all these things this way, I keep waiting for the moment when he stands up in some arena in, like, Alabama and says, all those treasury bonds the Chinese hold, how'd they get that money? They stole it. Why should we pay him back? I think that's where he's headed. I think if he's around if we give him another 4 years, I think that's where it's headed.
You've raised that point before.
I do. It seems a natural conclusion, right? I mean, it would be totally in character, not paying you back,
threatening not to pay back.
Oh yeah, totally. Right?
Treasury.
You remember this conversation, because when he says it in front of one of his crowds, they'll cheer. They'll cheer.
Markets won't.
No, they won't.
It brings up, the mindset of President Trump, where he looks at the stock market at record highs and says, we can afford something like this today because we're doing well.
Right.
Thanks for letting us throw a lot at you today.
That was fun.
And congratulations on paperback.
Good to see you guys.
Good to see you, Michael Lewis. Good Tuesday morning. Welcome to Squawk Alley. I'm Carl Quintanilla with Morgan Brennan at Post 9 of the New York Stock Exchange. We are in the midst of a sell-off today. As you can see, all the major averages are lower by at least 1%. Dow's down more than 1.5%. Meantime, John Fort's out in Las Vegas at Amazon's reInvent conference. We'll get a lot more from John in a moment, including his exclusive with AWS CEO Andy Jassy in just a moment. Let's start with the markets, though. Dow down 450. We're seeing the sell-off steepen a bit. Stocks down, bonds up amid heightened global trade tensions. The economic data this week, as you know, has not been all that great. The ISM's a little underwhelming yesterday, the fourth month of contraction. Urian Timmer joins us, Fidelity Investments Director of Global Macro, and with us as well, Manish Deshpande, Barclays Global Capital Head of U.S. Equity Research. Morning, guys. Good to see you.
Morning. Hi.
Urian, losing 3,100 has some people thinking to themselves, how much did we really pile on to fundamentals because we thought phase one was going to get signed?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the roller coaster of tariffs and trade, phase one deals or not phase one deals continues. the market did have a nice breakout out of a 21-month-long holding pattern. And at this point, the top of that holding pattern is around 3,000 and change, and we're pretty close to that. So my guess is that we'll retest that ceiling, and that would be, a 4 to 6% decline in the S&P. With a market that over the last 10 years has gone up 17% per year, and even since the valuation peak in 2018 has gone up 12%, we need to take that sort of, in stride and accept that, ups and downs are going to happen. But in terms of the ISM, as you point out, it was a little bit weaker this week, but generally speaking, once the ISM has peaked and you're about a year to a year and a half later, generally speaking, the forward returns and the batting average start to really pick up as the market starts to kind of discount a recovery. And I think that's generally remains the theme for the market. So I remain constructive over the next, 6 to 12 months or so.
Okay. Manish, how about you? Especially given that folks looking for global stabilization, particularly in Europe, did sort of pin that to at least the lack of an escalation in trade rhetoric, right?
Absolutely. So I think, one of the reasons definitely that we had this little bit of a rally over the last few weeks was because of the hopes of that some resolution of the trade war. However, actually, I would point out that if you look under the hood, leaving aside the overall S&P index, if you look at the actual stocks that are more directly impacted by the trade war, investors appear to be taking more of a wait-and-see approach. So our China trade basket, which sort of focuses on 60 or 70 names which you think are directly impacted by trade war, that has not gone back to the, let's say, the April highs that we saw earlier in the year. So I think investors were taking a wait-and-see approach, and that, I guess, in some sense has been borne out by the recent developments.
So Manish, just to dig into that a little bit further then, on a day like today, it's risk off. You see treasury yields falling. You see gold up. You see utilities and real estate. The best performers are really the only performers that are green within the S&P right now. Are you saying that those are the types of places that investors should continue to park their money?
I think we're taking, so in terms of our sector allocations, we're taking a mixed approach. So as you said, the risk of recession over the last few weeks has actually gone down. So cyclicals have outperformed. However, we think it's too early to sort of completely switch to cyclicals. So we think the recession risk have come down, but we're not completely out of the woods. And so we're taking a balanced approach. So in terms of our overweight, one of the things we are long industrials, but we're also long healthcare. So I think it's good to take sort of a barbell approach and not completely swing for the cyclicals right now.
Urian, President a moment ago said he pays more attention to the job market than the stock market. And we are going to get a look at jobs later in the week. We know the run rate's down by a quarter from a year ago. What's your outlook on that? And I wonder into 2020 as well.
It does come all down to jobs, right? So we've been in a global trade recession, if you will, for over a year and a half. The PMIs all over the world, did fall below 50. Some of them are starting to bounce. Certainly our ISM did not, as was expected, as you mentioned earlier. But ultimately, the transmission mechanism from a trade or a manufacturing recession to an actual jobs recession would be when profit margins continue to erode because you have late cycle pressures on wages, et cetera, and that slowdown in profits juxtaposed by rising wages ends up forcing companies to lay off people, and that's how you actually get a general recession. So everyone, of course, is looking at the jobless claims. Those will come out on Thursday, as they do every week, and those numbers have been very, very strong, but that is sort of the latest indicator that I think everyone will be watching, and as soon as it starts to tick up, everyone will start to proclaim the recession. I don't really expect it. I think the consumer side does remain strong, and I think the Fed's 3 rate cuts, along with pretty rapid expansion of its balance sheet, I think give the market a justifiable sense that we are past the weakest part of the economic cycle. And markets discount, right? This is why we see the PE go up to 18 times earnings, even though earnings are slowing, because this is how markets work. And I think this is what the markets are pricing in for next year. It may not be a robust recovery, but I do expect some recovery, and that the jobs picture, even though it will slow in terms of growth, will remain intact.
Manish, I know there's a lot of focus on 2020 right now, given the fact that we're into December. But I think back to last December when it was so volatile in the market. We saw that steep plunge in the major averages on Christmas Eve. Historically, December is a pretty solid month for the major averages. But the fact that we've started off, I mean, just week to date right now, we're 2 days into the month and we're down more than 2% on the S&P, the NASDAQ, and the Dow. Is there reason to be concerned that volatility is picking up again and that we could potentially see something play out the way we did last December?
That's not our base case, because clearly I think the big difference, of course, is the reaction function of the Fed. So back in September or sort of last fall, certainly the Fed was in a hiking mode, and that is what sort of scared the market. At this stage right now, what we're seeing is Fed is clearly in an easing mode, or at least an easing watch. And so that particular risk is certainly not there. Now, having said that, if the trade war was to completely flare up again, then of course that would be a source of vol. But the risk that we saw last December is not there. And I think in particular it's been interesting that even as rates have gone up and down by almost 30-40 basis points, I'm talking about the 10-year here, over the last few months, equity markets have generally held up quite well. But this disconnect between bonds and equities, actually one way to understand that is simply that the Fed put is alive and well, meaning that if the data worsens, then rates go down, and the equity market is okay with that. And if data becomes better, rates go up, and equity market is again okay with that. So essentially, the rate market is sort of is a ballast which is sort of holding the equity market up. Now, the one thing I would note that this is fine as it is, but as we have seen in the past, when the true recession hits, the Fed put sort of gets knocked out. And in that case, even if the Fed is easing aggressively, you still get a significant drawdown on the equity. So that risk is certainly there, but that's not our base case for December.
Gentlemen, thank you. Pretty helpful given all the news we've had thrown at us in the last 48 hours. Yuri and Manish, we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let's head back out to Las Vegas now and John Ford, who sat down with Amazon's cloud chief Andy Jassy earlier. Hey, John.
Hey, Morgan. Yeah, I mean, as you know, Amazon is the leader in the cloud, and this here in Vegas, AWS reInvent is their big cloud event of the year. Andy Jassy, who's the CEO of AWS, is also the founder, in essence, of Amazon Web Services, which really kicked off this cloud revolution. We talked about a lot over about 40 minutes. We talked about Amazon's focus on helping big enterprise companies transition into the cloud, increasing cloud performance. Expect to hear Jassy talk more about that in his keynote today. That's taking place right now. We talked about Chinese equipment in networks, and then just security in general, because he doesn't see this as just a Chinese equipment problem. We also talked about that JEDI contract that the DoD, Department of Defense, awarded to Microsoft about 5 weeks ago, and that Amazon is now contesting in court. He had some very sharp and specific things to say about that. His first comments on camera about JEDI, which we'll get to in a bit. And then there's the question of structure. Is AWS ever going to be a completely separate company from Amazon? Take a listen.
Now, I ask you this every year, and you give me the same answer every year, but I got to ask, because sometimes things change. Is Amazon going to spin out AWS in 2020?
No, I would be shocked if that was the case. And you know what? I think what I tell you every year is that I would never say never about anything. Having been at Amazon for almost 23 years and been a part of so many things I would have never predicted, I'll never say never, but there just isn't much need or incentive to do so. Typically, companies spin out units if they don't want them on their financial statements or if they need the money to fund the growth of the new unit. And neither of those are the case for AWS. And I also think that customers shouldn't really want us to spin out AWS, just because what customers really want from us is they want more features, more capabilities, more services, things that allow them to move their customer experiences forward, as opposed to if we spun out having to think about doing analyst calls and building a new HR system and things like that.
As lovely as those things are.
All sound very lovely.
I think it's more investors, though, who would salivate at the thought of AWS being valued on its own and the currency that would allow for buying other things. Is there any value in that?
Again, we don't think of it that way. You know, we're pretty famous for being willing to be misunderstood for long periods of time, and we're trying to build value for our customers and and a business that outlives all of us here. And so we think about how we build the company and how we evolve the company over many decades, as opposed to any one quarter or year.
All right, so pencils down. No need to adjust those models for a spin out, folks. When it comes to the cloud itself and hybrid, a year ago, Amazon AWS announced this concept called Outpost, which is Amazon equipment in data centers or in corporate locations, separate from the cloud, but updated by Amazon, kind of a hybrid approach. He talked a bit about the importance of that. Listen.
These are companies like Volkswagen, Lockheed Martin, and so we believe that a very large number of enterprises are going to use this as a way to bridge the existing workloads that have to remain on premises in their on-premises data center for a while with the rest of what they're doing in AWS.
Lots of technology talking here, as well as just the big shifts happening in economies around the world, guys.
Yeah, Lockheed Martin, I heard him mention right there, really speaking to the level of security that AWS has in place as well. John, we're looking forward to the rest of that interview coming up later on in the hour. So we do have more from AWS CEO Andy Jassy. What he's going to say about the Pentagon's Jedi Cloud contract, as you just heard John reference, that's at the bottom of the hour. First, though, after the break, it's the Navy's largest shipbuilding contract in its history. The CEO of Huntington Ingalls, Mike Petters, joins us on that $22 billion deal next and more. Stay with us.
This winter, there's no place like Wicked, the award-winning West End musical. Discover the incredible untold story of the Witches of Oz and how one came to be called good and the other wicked. Wicked at London's Apollo Victoria Theatre. Extra shows added for Christmas.
The very thought of you.
Michael Bublé. See him performing in the most picturesque and beautiful outdoor settings across the UK in July and August with Priority. If you're on O2, get Priority tickets up to 48 hours before general release from tomorrow. Search for Priority. Michael Bublé, live across the UK in July and August. Unforgettable live music experiences with O2. O2, breathe it all in. Terms apply.
Coffee shop, cashback, cat flaps, cashback, beanbags, rucksack, hire car, buy a car, flapjack, cashback, dumbbells, cashback, takeaway, holiday to anywhere the sun is at, bum bag, laptop, big match, hatchback, binge watching, paintballing, crab fishing, cashback, anything you want to buy, everywhere you want to go. Guess what? Cashback. Whatever you spend your money on, get money back every time with the American Express Platinum Cashback Everyday Credit Card. Search Amex Cashback. Representative 22.9% APR variable. Minimum annual spend to receive cashback. Terms apply. 18 plus subject to approval.
At TUI, we can help you find the perfect family holiday. And with flights from 20 UK airports, we make getting there a whole lot easier. Book now with thousands of free kids places, plus spread the cost and pay £0 deposit when you choose direct debit. Book online or in store with one of our travel experts. At TUI, we cross the T's, dot the I's and put you in the middle. Offer available on selected holidays for a limited time and subject to limited availability. Booking T's and C's apply. At all protected.
It's College Football Conference Championship weekend, and TuneIn is your home to hear all the champions crowned. This Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, it's the SEC Championship. The undefeated LSU Tigers, led by the Heisman frontrunner quarterback Joe Burrow, look to cap their perfect regular season. However, it won't be easy as their opponent, the Georgia Bulldogs, will be hungry to pull off the upset and earn their ticket to the College Football Playoff. Catch all the action on TuneIn. Search college football to find your game.
Welcome back to Squawk Alley. The Navy awarding the largest shipbuilding contract in its history last night, a $22 billion deal with Huntington Ingalls and General Dynamics Electric Boat to build 9 Virginia-class submarines for the Navy over the next decade. Huntington Ingalls CEO and President Mike Petters joins us now in a CNBC exclusive from the corporate headquarters in Newport News, Virginia. Mike, great to have you. I know we're actually sitting down to talk about the new aircraft carrier that's getting christened as well, but first I need to start with this news of the day. The fact that you did just receive with General Dynamics this award for more Virginia-class submarines. How will that impact the company? What does that mean?
Well, that's a very, first of all, thanks for having me again today, Morgan. It's great to be with you all. The contract last night establishes the rhythm for submarine production over the next decade, helps us balance the Virginia-class program with the startup of the Columbia program. And since there's significant overlap in our supply chain between the submarines and the aircraft carriers, it goes well with the 2 aircraft carrier contract that we got back at the beginning of this year. All of that pushes our backlog up close to $50 billion.
Wow. And speaking of that aircraft carrier, the Kennedy, it's the second in the Ford class. It's scheduled to be christened later this week. First christening for an aircraft carrier in 6 years. It's a $13 billion ship. Let's talk about the significance of this milestone and what this class of aircraft carrier is going to bring to the Navy that previous ones haven't.
Well, as you know, this is the second ship of the Ford class, and the Ford class is a redesign of the aircraft carrier ship after 40 years of executing design. So if you think about all the things in your life that have changed over the last 40 years, we've been able to incorporate most of those into the daily activity of this ship. Things like using electricity for heating spaces instead of using steam. All of that leads to reducing the maintenance cost of the ship. It reduces the manning on the ship. We've been able to take advantage of the technologies to make the ship more lethal in terms of sortie rate. And so all of that comes to bear with a 40-year gap in design. What's significant about the Kennedy is that we are now moving from the Ford, which was the first of the class, into production. And what that means is the first ship is as the lead ship. It's not just a production unit, it's also a prototype where you're testing out your design, you're testing out your training plans and your labor plans and your supply chains, and you're doing all of those things. And now on the Kennedy, we've been able to move past the prototype phase. We're actually into production, which then led the success we've had on Kennedy in terms of efficiencies, encouraged the Navy to move ahead with another 2 ships after the Kennedy. And so we're really excited about where this puts the program, and it puts our business, and it helps put the Navy on a good footing for the next decade.
Yeah, and that black buy is certainly getting a lot of attention earlier in the year as well. But just to dig into that a little bit more, Mike, that first in class, the USS Ford, it's been the subject of pretty fierce criticism, delays, ballooning costs. It's believed by some analysts to be the source of the, quote, large cost overruns that are referenced by President Trump in his tweets about the now former Navy Secretary Richard Spencer when he was fired last week as well. How are you getting your arms around some of those issues? And what does that mean in terms of production for these future ships?
Well, in our discussion with the Navy, we were pretty clear that, the very first ship of the class is, as I said before, is a prototype, and you're testing out all of the things that you think will work, but then you have to adjust as you discover going forward what did work and what didn't work. What we did then was, based on the things that we saw in the first ship production, in the building of the first ship, we made significant capital investments in the business to reduce the cost of the ship and allow us to put it together more efficiently. We're very happy with the returns that we're getting on that. And then we had a discussion with the Navy, and actually Secretary Spencer led this effort to move beyond how do you build it better, now how can you buy it smarter? And so his leadership actually drove the issue to get the 2 carrier buy done. So it's been a step process from prototype to efficiency to buy it smarter. And I think that that's why we're where we are today.
On a day where NATO is very much in focus with President Trump and other leaders meeting in London right now, increased defense spending from allies has definitely been a growth driver for a number of defense contractors. How are you thinking about the opportunity where international sales are concerned for Huntington Ingalls?
Yeah, defense, I understand the international piece of the defense market. For shipbuilding, it's a little bit different. For shipbuilders, countries want to build their own ships. And so while they're more than happy to talk with us about our designs and maybe some of our leadership skills and things like that, they really want to have the place where they build the ships in country, because that typically that's how they create the jobs, that's how they create their own supply chains. And so the international piece of our business is very, very small. It's not in shipbuilding. It's really over in our services piece, where we do a little bit of work there internationally. But it's not a significant part of who we are as a company.
Just a few moments ago, we got more comments from President Trump regarding China and IP theft, especially in the midst of this trade deal that is trying to be worked out right now. I know this is a topic you and I have discussed before, this idea of IP theft. It's been perhaps most significantly documented where defense is concerned, and particularly the Navy supply chain. How do you think about that? How big of an issue is it? And would you expect some sort of trade deal to actually change that security threat?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think the jury's out. I'm not sure the trade negotiations go hand in hand with the cyber issues that we've been dealing with from a security standpoint. We have to work really hard to protect our designs from any sort of intrusions, and then where we have to move to is we have to be able to protect our suppliers as well. And so, to our way of thinking, that's a whole separate issue from any sort of trade alliance or trade agreement that we might be making with the Chinese. I think that we know that we've been under attack from multiple sources for many years. Companies have gotten better at this. We've certainly gotten a lot better at this over the last decade. But that threat continues to change every day, and so we continue to step into it and try to stay in front of it.
Mike Petters, thanks for joining us today, the CEO of Huntington Ingalls. Congratulations on the Kennedy's christening later this week. Floating city, 4,660 personnel, 75 aircraft. It's just going to be absolutely massive. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having us.
We continue to watch the sell-off this morning. Dow down 405, transports down 2%. Worst two-day slide since early October, and on pace for the worst week in about 4 months.
I've got to tell you about our beautiful city break in Bath. Midweek is the perfect time to beat the crowds. Just an hour and a half by train from London. It was so relaxing. We headed straight for Bath Christmas Market. Oh, I can still smell the roasted chestnuts and mulled wine from the chalets. Then it was time for glow-in-the-dark mini-golf. I got a hole-in-one. Well, 3. I'm a bit rusty, okay? There's so much to do in Bath. I'm already planning my next trip.
Discover the magic of Bath this Christmas. Plan ahead at visitbath.co.uk/Christmas.
There's a growing threat from Moscow Centre, and Britain's intelligence service think they've found the man for the job.
The natural-born agent runner is his own man. He may take his orders from London, but in the field, he is the master of his fate and the fate of his agents.
A powerful portrait of our times, told with unflagging tension by one of the greatest novelists of our age, John le Carré's Agent Running in the Field. Available now at Waterstones.
This winter, there's no place like Wicked, the award-winning West End musical. Discover the incredible untold story of the Witches of Oz and how one came to be called good and the other wicked. Wicked at London's Apollo Victoria Theatre. Extra shows added for Christmas.
Get your home ready for Christmas. At littlewoods.com, you can order selected sofas, beds, and dining room furniture now and get them delivered in time for Christmas. Perfect for welcoming all of your guests. All with inclusive delivery and free returns. Own Christmas. Shop now at littlewoods.com. Order by 19th of December.
The very thought of you.
Michael Bublé. See him performing in the most picturesque and beautiful outdoor settings across the UK in July and August with priority. If you're on O2, get priority tickets up to 48 hours before general release from tomorrow. Search for priority. Michael Bublé, live across the UK in July and August. Unforgettable live music experiences with O2. O2, breathe it all in. Terms apply.
For the independent bookseller who found you that first edition. For the baker who brings the smell of freshly baked bread to your door.
And for the barista who never needs to ask your name.
We've all got a part to play.
Every little tap keeps your high street alive.
And helps your communities thrive.
So if you love where you live, shop small.
Shopping on your local high street can make a big difference. Shop small. Only by American Express.
European market's going to close in a couple minutes here. Seema Modi has a breakdown of today's market action overseas. Hey, Seema.
Hey, Carl. European stocks looking to avoid their first back-to-back percent drop since early October. Not surprisingly, it's those steel mining stocks that are highly volatile as we watch those trade concerns build. Trump administration latest salvo directed towards France, and that is certainly weighing on the country's biggest luxury and cosmetics companies. LVMH, Kering, that's the parent of Gucci, and Hermes, all down between 2 and 3%. Makeup giant L'Oreal also down slightly. Now, those four companies alone make up nearly 20% of France's benchmark index and contributed roughly $18 billion in combined U.S. sales last year. But it's the unexpectedly strong demand in China that has lifted shares this year. LVMH, Hermes, both headed for their best year since 2011, a sign that the world's luxury market is holding up in the face of these ongoing macroeconomic concerns. The onset, though, of these new tariffs comes at a crucial time. Back in October, the U.S. imposed tariffs on $7.5 billion worth of European goods, and that did include whiskey and cheese. This could be just the start. The U.S. Trade Representative Lighthizer saying the U.S. government is exploring similar investigations into digital service taxes in Australia, Italy, and Turkey. Guys, back to you.
Seema, thank you. Time now for a news update. Sue Herrera has that for us back at HQ. Sue?
Indeed, I do. Thanks so much, Morgan. Good morning, everyone. Here's what's happening at this hour. The early numbers are in on Cyber Monday, and shoppers spent an estimated $9.4 billion in online sales. That's a record high, boosted by late-night shoppers spending almost $3 billion between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Russian President Vladimir Putin is criticizing NATO's continued expansion. He says it is pointless given the absence of a threat from Moscow following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Putin was speaking at a meeting of Russian military leaders, while President Trump was meeting with NATO member states in London. Back-to-back snowstorms wreaking havoc on the Northeast. The winter weather has been blamed for at least 8 deaths, 240 flight cancellations, and 1,300 delays in the U.S. Residents in some area of New England are clearing as much as 2 feet of snow from their cars, their homes, and their walkways. And Tokyo Olympic organizers unveiled a replica of G satellite today. It's a tiny satellite that will orbit the Earth during the 2020 Summer Games. Its payload includes miniature animation characters as well that you see right there. Pretty darn cool. That is the news update this hour. Carl, I'll send it back downtown to you.
All right, Sue, thank you very much. When we come back, Amazon Web Services CEO Andy Jassy, a lot more from John's exclusive with the number 2 at Amazon. And, of course, we're all over the sell-off. Session low down about 450. We're not too far away from that. Don't go away.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
The swagger of a perfect dunk. The rush of a three made from all the way downtown. The adrenaline surge of great defense. Can you feel the goosebumps yet? There's nothing like live NBA and nothing like listening live on TuneIn.
Giannis down the lane to the rim, throwing down. Right corner three, another
TuneIn Premium brings you every minute of the NBA season so you can be there when it matters most. Never miss the action as it happens. Hear the ball you love. Hear it live on TuneIn. Search NBA today to start listening.
NFL fans, hear every live game on TuneIn Premium.
Running down the sidelines,
This Thursday, hear the home and away call as the Dallas Cowboys visit the Chicago Bears at 8:20 p.m. Eastern.
It's a block, easy touchdown, a walk-in touchdown. The third time's a charm.
At home or on the go, hear the home and away call of every NFL game this season on TuneIn Premium. Upgrade today. It's College Football Conference Championship weekend, and TuneIn is your home to hear all the champions crowned. This Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, it's the SEC Championship. The undefeated LSU Tigers, led by the Heisman frontrunner quarterback Joe Burrow, look to cap their perfect regular season. However, it won't be easy as their opponent, the Georgia Bulldogs, will be hungry to pull off the upset and earn their ticket to the college football playoff. Catch all the action on TuneIn. Search college football to find your game.
Some days life can get in the way of catching up on the news that moves your world. TuneIn is here to help. With live 24/7 coverage from CNN wherever you go on the TuneIn app, you can always find a slice of your schedule, however long, to check in on the biggest stories of the day.
Hell hath no fury. The president's counselor went on a rampage on a taped phone call with Washington Examiner reporter.
Search CNN on TuneIn to get the live news when it matters most.
It's Liz Hernandez with your TuneIn Music News Update. TMZ claims Fergie and Josh Duhamel have finalized their divorce and agreed that neither will pay child support. They have agreed to share joint legal and physical custody of their son. Meanwhile, Justin Bieber's wife, Hailey, is not pregnant. She posted, "The internet is funny. No, I'm not pregnant. I just really love food." To hear music from Justin Bieber and Fergie, search today's hits on TuneIn.
Welcome back to Squawk Alley. Turning back to the market sell-off. Bob Pisani is on the floor with more on the biggest movers amid today's push to the downside. Bob.
So tariff threats on two fronts. French goods, maybe tariffs there, and maybe not a deal this year. So you can see a very predictable reaction. First, you want to look at semiconductors and transports. These are the big ones here. NVIDIA, Micron. These all move on trade news, down 2 or 3%. High beta stocks, very typical. Same thing with the industrials. Transportation stocks a little bit on the weak side as well. As you can see here with FedEx and Ryder, weak. Caterpillar, deeper global industrials like Caterpillar and Cummins all down. This is all very predictable on negative news on the trade front. Big move in 10-year yields here, 10, 11 basis points. All the banks are down here, including some of the big regional banks like Fifth Third. These banks have all had a great year so far. A little bit of rockiness today. European luxury stocks, even though there was somewhat conciliatory comments between President Macron and President Trump, LVMH, Kieran up there, Richemont, of course, they own Cartier, Hermes, also on the weak side, as you can see there. Important thing, little bit of a bounce off of the lows here, but still an issue here. I just want to point out a lot of new lows in energy stocks. A terrible year, even though oil's up 20% on the year. New lows in Cabot and Occidental, Apache, Whiting, some of the smaller energy names, all hitting 52-week lows today. So remember what's moving the markets here. The Fed is not tightening. That has not changed. That's a big mover for the markets. The trade war, we don't know how to characterize this. Is it an uneasy truce? What is it now? Would the markets be satisfied with simply no new tariffs on December 15th? Keeping the existing tariffs and no deal going into the new year. The market's struggling with that concept now. I can assure you, if additional tariffs are on December 15th, no, that is not priced into the market. That would be an additional negative. And the global economy, Ed Yardeni had a great note out this morning. He said, a faint pulse. That's what you mean when you say, okay, we're bottoming, but are we really rebounding? We don't know. And he said it's possible you could get an L-shaped recovery and not a U-shaped recovery. It's a good observation. Again, two things we're grappling with that we don't have the answers with right now. A little bit of uncertainty in the markets. Finally, just on the steel stocks here, we had a big deal announced today here. Cleveland-Cliffs buying AK Steel. It makes sense. They're both in similar industries, kind of different parts of this steel business. But you can see these steel stocks, they've essentially become small cap stocks. It's just like many of the retailers, slowly but surely, they've just declined into small cap territory. Cleveland-Cliffs is a $2 billion company. That's a small cap company. AK Steel is below $1 billion. Allegheny, $2 billion. U.S. Steel, $2 billion. U.S. Steel. The only stock in the S&P 500 that's a steel stock is Nucor. and it's got a substantial market cap. That's sort of like at the low end of a big cap stock. So yes, we keep talking about these companies. U.S. Steel, famous, iconic company, but don't kid yourself. Like many of the retailers, they have devolved into very small cap, and that means they don't have a big impact on those indexes like the S&P that we follow very carefully. Guys, back to you.
All right. Thanks very much, Bob. Let's get back out to Vegas this morning and check in with John Ford, who sat down with AWS CEO Andy Jassy earlier at the company's 2019 reInvent conference. Hey, John.
Hey, Carl. Yeah, we've been talking about the cloud a lot on Squawk Alley, and a big part of what's going on right now is big game hunting. These companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, going after logos, big enterprise companies, not only to get them into the cloud, but get them more deeply engaged in the cloud. Well, there's no bigger game than the U.S. government, the Department of Defense. There was that $10 billion Jedi cloud contract that a lot of people thought was Amazon's to lose, and they lost it. They lost it to Microsoft. They are taking it to court, and I asked Andy Jassy about that to see just how specific he would get about what he thinks was wrong with this process. He got pretty specific. Listen.
We obviously don't believe that Jedi was adjudicated fairly. I think that anybody who does a detailed apples-to-apples comparison of the platforms don't come out in the same spot that procurement did. And most of our customers tell us we're about a couple years ahead of anybody else with regard to functionality and maturity. But, you know, there was significant political interference here. And when you have a sitting president who's willing to be very vocal that they dislike a company and the CEO of that company, it makes it difficult for government agencies, including the DoD, to make objective decisions without fear of reprisal. And I think that's dangerous and risky for our country.
So is your position that it's impossible that Microsoft won this fair and square, or just that there are real questions given the president's comments and arguably interference in this process about whether it could have been fair?
I think that if you look at the details of it, which I obviously know the details of it a little bit differently than other people, but it's just very, very difficult to look at the comparison objectively and come out the way that the DoD did.
And what kinds of details are you talking about?
Just, I'm pretty aware of the respective components and features and capabilities and what the requirements were in Jedi, and so. I think it's quite difficult to end up making that decision that they did in a fair and objective way.
Now, tell me and tell the viewers, I think this is important, big picture, why this matters when it comes to a country like the United States, a process like military contracts. Why is this fundamentally important?
Well, I think that the security of the United States, the national security of the United States, is quite important, not just to the U.S., but to the world as a whole. And when you have to do work to modernize your technology capabilities, as the DoD does, you need the best possible technology platform to build what you need to build on top of. And I think that not just for the national security of the country, but also if you think about the thousands of decisions that we have to make across our government that are really important for our country, those decisions have to be made on objective criteria and be free of political interference, or we're not going to make the right decisions for the country.
So did you know as soon as this decision came down that you guys were going to take this to court?
Not the second that we heard the decision. Like anything, you have to look at the details, and you have to understand what the rationale was. And there was a lot of data that, in any one of these procurements that you get after the decision was made. But after we look at the data carefully, there was really little question. I think we have to shine a light on what happened here.
How much is Jeff a part of that process? Because he certainly was a central part of the issue, it seems, as far as the president was concerned, and talking about Amazon and the possibility that really did influence this process.
Like everything at Amazon, Jeff is aware of what's going on and has a say in what's going on, and is supportive of the decision we made.
Andy Jassy there, not tiptoeing around it. President Trump's interference. he says is the central issue and why they have a problem with how the Jedi contract was awarded. Those 4 videos that they submitted, certainly part of the evidence they put together on this. Jeff Bezos, he said, did weigh in and agree with the rest of the team's decision to take this to court. And he's saying it's not just a matter of national security, but also a matter of global security based on the United States' important position. Now, we also talked about a lot more, including the presence of Chinese technology in networks. Amazon deals with a lot of different companies all over the world. So I asked him about that specifically. He said it's not just a matter of China. It's a matter of being able to vet systems to make sure they are secure and do that constantly. Listen.
Companies have to be very thoughtful about what software they use and what equipment they use everywhere. And by the way, it's not just China. There are lots of places where you have to be really thoughtful about it. We don't really use Chinese equipment or software, but
why is that?
We just, over time, almost all the software that we use, we've built ourselves. Even in the network, we work with some players like Cisco, but we've also built a number of our own routers. Over time, for scale and for cost reasons, we've had to develop a lot of our own equipment. And same thing, we design our own hardware, we design our own chips at this point, and build our own chips. And so, but I would also say that, as I mentioned earlier, anything that we bring into our facilities, regardless of which country it comes from, we have a very rigorous and detailed and careful process to inspect. And you have to do all kinds of testing to make sure that what you're getting is what you think you're getting.
And Andy, that's what I wonder, because so much of this conversation around Chinese equipment and Chinese technology, I think you alluded to this, you need to protect against everything and everyone everywhere, right? And shouldn't there be a way, an objective way, of testing technology and testing equipment to make sure it's safe? Otherwise, if we're just looking at one particular country and deciding, well, they're the problem, well, there are a couple countries over there that maybe could slip something bad into the network where you're not looking.
Yeah, I think, again, it's kind of like, it's like software testing, it's any quality testing. There are lots of standard ways that you can test, but there are also lots of things you have to guard against. And so there isn't just one set of 10 tests that you can run and say you're good. You have to have a very full and robust set of tests that you're running all the time on your software and on your hardware. And so, I think, I think there are certain countries where you see more of this espionage type of behavior. And you have to be thoughtful if you're going to consume products or parts from those countries. But it's also true that if you have the right set of tests and if you're really diligent and rigorous about it, you can test and make sure you don't have a problem.
And you feel confident that you're doing that?
Yeah, and the AWS side and the Amazon side, yes.
And we also talked about lessons learned from what they called HQ2, the search in New York and the DC area for new facilities. Of course, New York backed out of that, or Amazon backed away from New York after encountering trouble with the local community. Lessons learned for Amazon there. We also talked about his outlook on the global economy, given the fact that he's investing so much in sales and marketing right now. Talked about that on the earnings call Amazon did, and how that could affect margins, whether that is a call on how the global economy is going to look in a year or two. He talked about long-term, the opportunity that he sees there. You can catch the entire interview online, CNBC.com. Andy Jassy clearly has a lot to say, guys.
Great stuff, John, and certainly making a lot of news today, especially for those of us that have been following all of this Jedi contracting controversy for months on end now. Appreciate it. John Ford out in Las Vegas. Stocks losing ground in today's session, with the Dow near session lows, down over 400 points just a few moments ago. We've got more on today's sell-off straight ahead. Stay with us.
Get your home ready for Christmas. At littlewoods.com, you can order selected sofas, beds, and dining room furniture now and get them delivered in time for Christmas. Perfect for welcoming all of your guests. All all with inclusive delivery and free returns. Own Christmas. Shop now at littlewoods.com. Order by 19th of December.
Coffee shop, cashback, cat flaps, cashback, beanbags, rucksack, hire car, buy a car, flapjack, cashback, dumbbells, cashback, takeaway, holiday to anywhere the sun is at, bum bag, laptop, big match, hatchback, binge watching, paintballing, crab fishing, cashback, anything you want to buy, everywhere you want to go. Guess what? Cashback. Whatever you spend your money on, get money back every time with the American Express Platinum Cashback Everyday Credit Card. Search Amex Cashback. Representative 22.9% APR variable. Minimum annual spend to receive cashback. Terms apply. 18 plus subject to approval.
Hey, turn it down. Now play the big hit. That's better. Get our lowest ever price on these Bose QC35 wireless headphones. With noise cancellation and voice control in the Black Tag event at Curry's PC World. Or get £50 off Bose SoundLink on-ear wireless headphones. Either way, you get 6 months free Spotify in the Black Tag event at Curry's PC World. T's and C's apply.
At TradePoint, we know that big jobs can mean a big shop around. We've a wide range of products from kitchens to plumbing to electrical or timber, so you can get it all in one place, 7 days a week, making big jobs smaller. So, for all you need, when you need it, get to TradePoint or go to tradepoint.co.uk.
Your old car, your loyal friend, so many memories. It's impossible to leave their side.
Until now, get £5,000 off a selected brand new Citroën when you trade in your old car.
Alors, out with the old, in with the new. Hello Citroën, hello comfort.
The Citroën Swappage. Trade in your old car for a brand new Citroën, including the award-winning SUV range.
Citroën.
Discount on OTR price of selected Citroëns excluding C1. Registered by the 31st of December when trading in a qualifying vehicle. Not in conjunction with other offers. Search Citroën Swappage for full T's and C's.
I'm Scott Wapner. Here's what's coming up halftime before top of the hour. Today, December, off to a rocky start. President Trump signaling he may not do a trade deal with China before next year's election. So is that a game changer for your money? We're going to debate that. Plus, what is the future of the FANG trade? One firm breaking down the stocks that are too low, too high, and just right. And it is one of the biggest battleground stocks in this market. Tesla, someone says it's a must-own. So why doesn't anyone on the investment committee own it? That and more when we see it at noon. Morgan, we're 10 away, and we'll see you in just a few.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it, Scott. Thanks. Let's get over to the CME now and Rick Santelli, the Santelli Exchange. Hey, Rick.
Good morning, and thank you. You know, I look up at the board, I see 169. That means we're down 13 basis points in 10-year notes. Let's look at a chart starting October 1st. We've been talking on the Santelli Exchange about how heavy it looked and how we failed at the 190 level. So this isn't shocking. Look at the dollar index. This is a November 1st start. That chart really looks heavy. Now, everybody is saying, of